Welcome back. Get comfortable. Grab something warm. Because tonight, we are going somewhere strange. Deep in the Pacific Northwest, tucked between the pine trees and the fog, there is a small Oregon town that should not exist the way it does. The compasses go haywire near its cliffs. The creatures that crawl through its woods were never cataloged by any scientist. The summer nights there carry a low, impossible hum that no one can explain. A paranormal researcher once spent years trying to document everything strange about this place, filling 3 handwritten journals with sketches and warnings and desperate scrawled questions. And even he never got to the bottom of it. That town is Gravity Falls. And even after 40 episodes, 3 canon books, a global real world scavenger hunt, a decade of fan theories, and hundreds of decoded ciphers, it is still full of questions that have never been answered. This video is for those questions. All 200 of them. This is not a recap. This is not a beginner's guide. This is a long, slow, cozy walk through every corner of Gravity Falls lore that the show never fully explained. The lingering threads, the background details that never got addressed, the cryptograms that unlock more mysteries than they solve, the character moments that raise questions nobody has officially answered, and the cosmic implications of a story that is so much bigger than one summer in Oregon. So, settle in, pull the blanket up. This is going to take a while, and honestly, that is exactly the point. Section 1. The town itself. Why is Gravity Falls so weird? Let's start at the very beginning because the biggest mystery in this entire show is something the show itself never fully answered. And it is the one question that sits underneath every single other mystery on this list. Why is Gravity Falls weird? Not weird in the way a quirky small town is weird. Not weird in the way Oregon in general has a reputation for strange roadside attractions and eccentric locals. Weird in the way that gravity itself appears to malfunction in certain spots. Weird in the way that a magnetic anomaly bends every compass needle away from north when you walk too close to the floating cliffs. Weird in the way that a baby girl born there one summer can age backward. Weird in the way that gnomes are real, living, politically organized creatures who attempted to kidnap a 12-year-old girl and force her into becoming their queen. Weird in the way that a triangular, interdimensional entity with trillions of years of existence had its sights set on this exact patch of northwestern American woodland specifically, as the location where the boundary between the physical world and the dimension of pure chaos was thinnest. Why here? Stanford Pines spent 6 years in Gravity Falls before he was pulled through his own portal and scattered across 30 years of dimensional wandering. And he never answered that question cleanly. His journals document the effects of the weirdness in exhaustive, obsessive detail. Creatures, anomalies, geographical strangeness. But the root cause, the why beneath the what, Ford wrote around rather than through. In an entry written in invisible ink only revealed under blacklight, Ford notes that his compass goes haywire the closer he gets to the floating cliffs, and then asks the question that hangs like smoke over the whole series. Does this mean what he thinks it means? The answer, he writes, may be underground. Underground. That single word points toward something ancient sitting beneath Gravity Falls, something Ford either never reached or never finished documenting. The show gives us a partial answer in Season 2, when Ford explains to Dipper that the valley and the cliffs themselves were formed millions of years ago by the crash landing of an alien spacecraft. A flying saucer of genuinely enormous scale, something that dwarfed anything human beings have ever built, came down in this specific location a very long time ago and left behind a crater that eventually became the valley where Gravity Falls sits today. The impact, Ford theorizes, tore something in the fabric between dimensions. It left a wound in reality that never healed. And the weirdness, the supernatural density of the area, the reason creatures flock there, the reason anomalies cluster there, all of it bleeds out of that wound. That is a stunning piece of lore. It is also, when you think about it carefully, only the beginning of the questions it raises. Mystery number one. What exactly was the spacecraft? The show tells us a craft came down, and Ford says the crash formed the valley. But the craft itself, its origin, its purpose, its occupants, what happened to the occupants? None of that is addressed. The debris must be somewhere. If a machine large enough to shape a valley crashed here, there are pieces of it buried in the ground beneath Gravity Falls right now. Ford, a scientist of extraordinary capability, must have found something during 6 years of underground tunneling and research. What did he find? Why did he never write about it directly? Mystery number two. The wound in reality that the crash created. Is it healing or is it getting worse? The events of Weirdmageddon suggest that the tear was being deliberately exploited by Bill Cipher, who used the portal to widen it catastrophically. But after Weirdmageddon was reversed and Bill was destroyed, what happened to the dimensional scar itself? The show ends with Gravity Falls returning to normal, but normal by Gravity Falls standards still means gnomes, still means living wax statues, still means bottomless pits. The background weirdness did not go away, which suggests the wound is still there. Mystery number three. The native peoples who lived in the area that would become Gravity Falls long before any European settlers arrived had already encountered Bill Cipher. The Disney Wiki and Ford's own journals reference that hundreds of years before the events of the show, residents of the land discovered that Bill was dangerous, found a way to defeat him using the same zodiac prophecy that would later almost work in the finale, and left behind a painting depicting their encounter along with warnings. They knew about Bill. They knew about the zodiac. They were here, in this place, dealing with this exact problem, which means the dimensional wound was active and accessible for centuries before Ford accidentally made it worse. Who were they? What happened to them? Did their knowledge survive in any form other than the painting Ford eventually discovered? The town's history runs far deeper than the show had time to fully explore, and the indigenous history of that specific valley is almost entirely unaddressed. Mystery number four. The name. Gravity Falls is not a natural name for a town. It is not the kind of name that gets attached to a place because of a river or a founding family. It is the kind of name that gets attached to a place because something about that name is literally true. Gravity, at certain points in the town's geography, does fall. It behaves incorrectly. The opening credits of the show show Dipper and Mabel floating in their room. Objects lifting off surfaces, gravity suspending itself before snapping back. This is framed as a visual flourish, but it is also foreshadowing the very real gravity anomalies that happen around the portal and throughout the valley. Who named this town? When? Did they know what they were naming? Did the name come before or after somebody noticed the gravity was wrong? Quentin Tremblay, the eighth-and-a-half president of the United States, who is one of the show's stranger side revelations, founded Gravity Falls as a town. The show establishes this in the episode Irrational Treasure, where Dipper and Mabel uncover a conspiracy involving Tremblay's existence being literally erased from history. Tremblay was officially declared mentally unfit, and his entire presidency scrubbed from the record, and the town he founded was buried right alongside him. This means Gravity Falls, the place, was named by a man who the United States government subsequently decided to pretend never existed. It was named by a forgotten president, and it carries a name that references a physical phenomenon that should be impossible, And somehow, after all of this, it still ended up on regular maps as a regular town where regular people live and raise families and run tourist traps. How regular is it really? How many of the residents know at some level that the ground beneath their feet is fundamentally different from the ground beneath any other town in the country? The Society of the Blind Eye spent years erasing people's memories specifically to keep the weirdness from driving the town population to mass hysteria. That organization existed because the weirdness was consistent enough and visible enough that people kept noticing it and needed to be made to forget. For a small town to have a functioning secret society dedicated to memory erasure, the rate of encounters with the paranormal must have been genuinely overwhelming. Mystery number 5, the town's borders. When Bill Cipher finally achieves physical form during Weirdmageddon, one of his first and most frustrated discoveries is that he cannot leave Gravity Falls. A force field surrounds the town. He is trapped. Bill is an entity of almost incomprehensible power. He vaporized Time Baby and his entire army with what seemed like no real effort. Something Ford describes as being essentially impossible. And yet a geographic boundary stops him cold. What is that boundary made of? How long has it been there? Ford's equation to collapse the dimensional barrier is what created the portal and eventually the rift that allowed Weirdmageddon to begin. But was the boundary around the town something Ford created, something pre-existing, or something that formed naturally as a consequence of the dimensional wound? The show implies it was something Ford either built or reinforced, but the specifics are never made clear. There is a version of this where the boundary around Gravity Falls is as ancient as the crash itself, a natural scar tissue where two dimensions press against each other, and that boundary is precisely why everything strange collects inside the town limits and doesn't spread outward. The gnomes do not operate in the next county over. The zombies stay local. The strange creatures in the woods do not migrate to Portland. Something keeps the weirdness contained, and we do not really know what that something is, or whether it remains stable now that the portal is gone. Mystery number 6, the address. The Mystery Shack's official address is 618 Gopher Road, Gravity Falls, Oregon. The number 618 appears throughout the show in dozens of places, on signs, in backgrounds, on documents, repeated with a consistency that goes beyond decoration. Alex Hirsch's birthday is June 18th, which is the 6th month and the 18th day, hence 618. That is the real-world origin of the number. But within the fiction of the show, 618 is everywhere, including in places where it serves no narrative function and appears to be simply embedded in the world. Does the number 618 mean something within Gravity Falls lore? Is it a signature left behind by whoever or whatever designed the valley? Is it pure coincidence that the show's creator chose to embed his birthday everywhere in a world built on hidden patterns? Or is it, as some fans have theorized, a kind of meta-commentary? The idea that Gravity Falls as a universe was itself created by a higher intelligence who left personal signatures in the fabric of reality. That theory sounds wild until you remember that the show features a character who interacts with the fourth wall, whose creator literally voices him, and who refers to the audience directly in ways that suggest an awareness of existing within a fictional frame. But we will get to Bill later. Mystery number 7, the flora and fauna. The creatures of Gravity Falls are not random. They follow patterns. They have societies, hierarchies, political structures, seasonal behaviors. The gnomes have a king and operate in large organized swarms. The manitors have a society built around masculinity trials and have a specific location in the woods where they gather. The unicorns are not the gentle, magical creatures of fairy tales. They are snobbish, territorial, and possess hair with specific supernatural properties that Ford knows about. which means Ford encountered them and documented the transaction at some point. The multi-bear is a single creature with multiple bear heads who listens to pop music and has specific taste preferences. These are not background decorations. These are signs of a functional supernatural ecosystem that predates the portal, that predated Ford's arrival, that presumably predated the town itself. The creatures of Gravity Falls are not attracted to the weirdness. They are native to it. They evolved here. They are part of whatever the valley naturally produces, which raises the question of what a complete biological survey of Gravity Falls would look like, and how many species Ford missed in 6 years of research that fills 3 journals and still leaves him noting he has only scratched the surface. Mystery number 8, seasonal weirdness. The show is set entirely in summer, and the summer of Gravity Falls is legitimately strange by any measure. But what happens in winter? What happens when the nights get long and cold and the woods go quiet? Do the gnomes hibernate? Do the supernatural events slow down, speed up, or change in character? The show never addresses the off-season ecology of Gravity Falls at all. Ford spent years there, including multiple winters, and his journals, at least the portions we have access to, say nothing about seasonal patterns. That silence is its own mystery. Either nothing interesting happens in winter, which seems unlikely given everything, or something so interesting happens that Ford chose not to write about it in any journal Dipper could find. Mystery number 9, the all-knowing mailbox. The show features, as a one-off gag, a mailbox at a specific location in Gravity Falls that is implied to be able to answer any question. It is listed in Ford's journals. Dipper visits it, asks a question, and gets an answer. The mailbox knows things it should not know. It knows things about the future. And then the show moves on. The mailbox is never explained. It is never returned to. It is just there at a fixed location, knowing everything, and nobody seems concerned about that. What is it? Who built it? Has it been there since the crash, absorbing ambient dimensional information for millions of years? Is it somehow connected to the same weirdness hotspot that powers everything else in the valley? Does it have any connection to the other cosmic entities referenced in the show's mythology? The axolotl? Time Baby? The forces that exist outside the normal flow of reality? The all-knowing mailbox is one of the most quietly disturbing background elements in the whole show, precisely because the show treats it as mundane and never circles back. Mystery number 10, the bottomless pit. There is a literal bottomless pit in Gravity Falls. Stan uses it as a garbage disposal. Things thrown into it can end up anywhere. At the end of the show, the journals, all 3 of them, are thrown into the bottomless pit to keep them out of dangerous hands. Those journals contain the sum total of Ford's knowledge about Gravity Falls, including information about the portal, about Bill, about dozens of supernatural entities, about the valley's history. And they are tossed into a hole in the ground that leads nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. This is played as a kind of hopeful ending. The dangerous knowledge is gone, the family is safe, the summer is over. But the bottomless pit does not destroy things. It relocates them. Things thrown into the bottomless pit can end up anywhere. Those journals are somewhere. In some dimension, in some timeline, in some impossibly distant location. 3 red and green and dark burgundy books are sitting on the ground, waiting for the wrong person to find them. And at least one of those books, Journal 3 specifically, has an entire section written in invisible ink that contains information about how to summon, negotiate with, and potentially free Bill Cipher. Those words are still out there. Somewhere. That is mystery number 10, and we are still in the first section. Drop a comment right now and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is. Seriously, Something about the idea of people all over the world settling in with this video at completely different hours of the night, in completely different places, all thinking about the same strange little town. That feels very Gravity Falls to me. Leave your time and your place below. Section 2. The Three Journals. Pages missing, secrets written, warnings ignored. The journals are the spine of Gravity Falls. Everything connects back to them. Every mystery in the show either began with something Ford wrote in one of those 3 volumes, or was documented in them after the fact. They are the most important objects in the show, and they're also deeply, fundamentally incomplete. This section is about what the journals contain, what they leave out, and why the gaps matter. Ford began writing the journals when he first arrived in Gravity Falls in the mid-1970s. He had come to investigate supernatural anomalies after a grant application for research into an area of unusual paranormal density was approved. The kind of grant that exists in a universe where universities quietly fund research into things they publicly deny. He showed up with scientific equipment, an open mind, and the particular fearlessness of someone who has spent their whole life being told they are too smart for their own good. He built a house in the woods, the building that would eventually become the Mystery Shack. And he started writing. Journal 1 covers his first 3 years in Gravity Falls. It is the foundational document, the one where Ford's wonder is still fresh, where the tone is closer to excited than terrified, where he is still treating the valley as a puzzle to be solved rather than a threat to be survived. He documents creatures. He documents geographical anomalies. He records his 30-hour arm wrestling challenge with a unicorn, and the fact that Ford could arm wrestle a unicorn for 30 consecutive hours tells you something both about Ford's physical capabilities and about the specific nature of unicorns in this universe. The journal also introduces the floating cliffs, those impossible formations visible from various points in the valley, and includes the compass entry about things being underground. Mystery number 11. Who taught Ford the codes? The journals are written in multiple cipher systems, and it is not the most obvious question in the world, but it is one that deserves attention. Ford uses Caesar ciphers, @bash ciphers, the A1Z26 substitution system, and eventually the Visionaire cipher, which is a more sophisticated keyed encryption system. These are not things a physicist typically learns as part of a standard academic curriculum. Someone at some point taught Ford Pines the art of enciphered writing, or Ford taught himself, and the question of when and why he started using these codes is never addressed directly. The most chilling possibility is that Bill taught him. That in the early days of their collaboration, when Bill was posing as a helpful interdimensional entity who wanted to partner with Ford on legitimate scientific research, part of what Bill offered was a system for recording sensitive information securely. The codes would have seemed like a practical, even generous gesture. Here is how you protect your research. Here is how you keep dangerous knowledge from the wrong hands. What Bill would have known, being Bill, is that he could read those codes perfectly well and had access to everything Ford wrote regardless. The codes were not for keeping things from Bill. They were for keeping things from everyone else. Mystery number 12. The monocle. Attached to the inside cover of Journal 3 on a cord, there is a monocle. For much of the show's run, the purpose of this monocle is completely unexplained. Ford wears glasses, not a monocle. The monocle does not appear to belong to any character the show introduces. Why is it there? The eventual in-universe answer, revealed in the published replica of Journal 3, is that Ford attached the monocle because he was experiencing a burning pain in his right eye, a side effect of Bill possessing him in his sleep and using Ford's body without Ford's awareness. The monocle allowed Ford to read with his left eye while keeping his right eye covered. That explanation answers the surface question. It does not address the deeper horror it implies. If Ford's eye was burning because Bill was possessing him while he slept, regularly enough that it became a practical problem requiring a monocle solution, then Bill had access to Ford, to his thoughts, to his research, to his laboratory, to his body, for an extended period before Ford realized what was happening. Ford was being used as a puppet during his most vulnerable hours, and the notes Ford made about his own growing paranoia, his certainty that something was watching him, his increasing isolation and erratic behavior, those notes make a great deal more sense when you understand that the thing watching him was already inside his head. Mystery number 13, the pages Bill destroyed. When Weirdmageddon begins in earnest, one of Bill's first acts is to locate and burn all three journals. They burn. Ford watches them burn. They are destroyed. And then, after Bill is defeated and Weirdmageddon is reversed, Seuss finds the journals apparently unharmed in the ashes. The show's explanation, or rather, the implication, is that undoing Weirdmageddon also undid Bill's acts of destruction, restoring things he had ruined. Fine, but here is the thing. The reversal of Weirdmageddon was accomplished by erasing Stan's memories, which erased Bill from within Stan's mind. The reversal mechanism was psychological and personal, not temporal. It was not a rewind of events, it was an unmaking of Bill's presence in physical reality. So what, precisely, does it mean for the journals to be restored? Were they actually restored to their pre-burning state, including any pages that had already been torn out, damaged, or hidden before the events of Weirdmageddon? Or were they restored only to the state they were in before Bill set fire to them? Still missing whatever was missing before. Ford's notes repeatedly reference sections of his research that he hid separately from the journals themselves, buried in the bunker, locked in his private study, stored in places he hoped Bill would never find. Some of that research is referenced in the journals, but not reproduced in them. There is a catalog of missing material implied by what Ford writes about without showing. Experiments too dangerous to record, encounters too disturbing to put on paper, findings that Ford explicitly chose to encode in systems so complex that even he needed time to decode them on rereading. Mystery number 14. What is in Journal 2 that Gideon knew about? Gideon Gleeful, the villainous child prodigy who serves as the show's primary antagonist through much of Season 1, had Journal 2 in his possession before the twins ever arrived in Gravity Falls. He found it as a child, at school, which raises its own set of questions about how a journal full of supernatural research ended up in a school setting. Gideon studied that journal extensively. He learned enough from it to attempt to summon Bill's cipher, though his attempt was unsuccessful and required Bill to initiate contact. He believed that with all three journals he could take over Gravity Falls. But here is what we never learn. What specifically did Gideon take from Journal 2? What knowledge did he accumulate over what appears to be years of study? The show treats Gideon as a gifted fraud, a child with some real supernatural talent, mostly derived from a stolen amulet, but ultimately no match for the genuine power he was trying to access. But someone that young, that obsessive, poring over a journal of supernatural knowledge for years. Gideon knows things about Gravity Falls that never made it into any episode of the show. Things Ford documented, and Gideon read, and never shared with anyone. Mystery number 15. The Creature Catalog Gap. Ford's journals document a significant but clearly incomplete fraction of the creatures inhabiting the Gravity Falls area. Journal 1, by Ford's own accounting, focuses on his first 3 years of research and covers mythical beasts and geographic anomalies. Journal 2 goes deeper into experiments and darker findings, including curses and incantations, the most dangerous journal by Ford's own description. Journal 3 is the comprehensive volume Dipper finds, covering supernatural entities and multiverse theories. Even together, they document only a portion of the valley's ecology. Ford himself says this. He writes about the crawlspace black market, a paranormal underground economy operating through hidden entrances around town that he has never seen with his own eyes. He notes legends about it, sketches a diagram of the market's rumored layout, and then acknowledges he cannot confirm any of it. A thriving paranormal black market operating within the same geographic area Ford spent years cataloging, and he never accessed it directly. That market, whoever runs it, whatever is traded there, whatever it connects to, represents a whole layer of Gravity Falls supernatural society that the show never touches. Mystery number 16. The Blank Pages. Scattered throughout the published version of Journal 3, there are pages that are partially or fully blank. Not blank as in empty, but blank as in the text is in invisible ink, not activated in the standard edition of the book. The Blacklight Special Edition of Journal 3 reveals many of these pages, including a stunning passage written by Bill while possessing Ford in his sleep, cheerful and unnerving in Bill's characteristic style. But there are also passages in the Blacklight version that reference events and entities not depicted in the show itself. Ford's notes about the dream hipster, a creature that confronts its victims with their worst fears and then makes terrible jokes about them. Notes about creatures Ford encountered in his first year that he never revisited. Half-finished analyses of phenomena he was still investigating when he was pushed through the portal. Those half-finished analyses point toward research Ford never completed. Whatever Ford was working on when Stan accidentally shoved him through the gateway, that research stopped mid-thought. It is still incomplete. The answers Ford was approaching at the moment of his disappearance are simply absent from the record because there was no one there to finish writing them. Mystery number 17. The Water Cave. Ford's notes mention a cave behind the waterfall in Lake Gravity Falls. One line. No follow-up. There is a cave behind the waterfall at the lake. What is in it? The show takes place almost entirely in summer when the lake is a popular gathering spot for the town. People swim there. People boat there. Right behind the waterfall, there is apparently a cave that Ford documented and then never returned to, or at least never wrote about returning to. Given the rate at which Gravity Falls hides extraordinary things inside ordinary-looking spaces, a vending machine that leads to a dimensional portal, a tree that conceals an underground bunker, a tourist trap that sits on top of a laboratory, a cave behind a waterfall seems like exactly the kind of location that should have something significant inside it. Mystery number 18. The Alchemy Symbols. The back cover of Journal 3 is covered in alchemical symbols. When you look at them carefully, 4 specific symbols, composition, pulverization, digestion, and fusion, are actually the code Stan uses to access Ford's underground laboratory. So the alchemical symbols are not decoration, they are functional. They encode instructions that Stan apparently learned at some point, suggesting Ford taught his brother at least some elements of the lab's access codes before things went wrong between them. But alchemy as a discipline has a rich and strange history, and Ford's use of alchemical notation throughout his journals suggests a connection between his scientific research and much older traditions of natural philosophy and occult practice that the show never explored. Mystery number 19. The hidden page about the Northwest family. In the published Journal 3, Ford documents his investigations into the Northwest family, the founding family of Gravity Falls in the official historical record. the wealthy dynasty that maintained social dominance over the town for generations. Ford's research into the Northwests revealed things about them that the episode Northwest Mansion Mystery partially addresses. A generational deal made with a ghost, a history of deception woven into the town's official founding story. But Ford's journal entries about the Northwests include references to things that extend beyond what the episode covered. The Northwests, according to scattered notes, made agreements with multiple supernatural entities, not just the lumberjack ghost. The Northwest family's social power in Gravity Falls is at least partly supported by supernatural arrangements entered into by previous generations. The full scope of those arrangements, what was given, what was received, what conditions were placed on the family and their descendants, is never fully laid out. Mystery number 20, the journal entries about Bill's history with the pyramids. One of the most explosive pieces of lore buried in the Journal 3 blacklight pages is a note referencing Bill's interactions with ancient civilizations. Ford's research, cross-referenced with them with information Bill apparently gave him during their partnership, suggests that Bill had previously attempted to get Egyptians and George Washington to open portals to his realm. The pyramids, Ford writes, were built to appease Bill's anger after his human collaborators failed to uphold their end of the deal. The Illuminati symbol on American currency, the Eye of Providence, was created as a tribute to Bill by his followers. If this is true, and within the show's universe it appears to be, then Bill Cipher has been attempting to escape the nightmare realm for thousands of years, using whatever technologically capable civilization he could reach across millennia of human history. Ford was not his first attempt. He was just the one who came closest to succeeding. The entire sweep of human civilization contains the fingerprints of a triangular entity trying to punch through the boundary between dimensions, leaving behind monuments and symbols and secret societies in his wake. The history of the world looks slightly different when you know what Bill was doing in it. Section 3. The Mystery Shack. What is built into those walls? From the outside, the Mystery Shack looks like exactly what it is supposed to be. A slightly run-down wooden building in the Oregon woods, painted with a sign that has been missing its final letter for years. Mystery Shack. But the S fell off during a fight with a wax replica of Sherlock Holmes, and Stan never replaced it because Stan has strong opinions about the informational value of signage. The roof is uneven. There's a totem pole in the yard that looks like standard Pacific Northwest tourist kitsch. The gift shop smells like dust and cheap merchandise. The exhibits inside are obvious fakes. A Sasquatch made of foam, a jackalope that no one is looking at too carefully. It is a tourist trap. It is a scam. It is, in Stan's own words, an attraction for people who are too credulous to know better and too polite to demand refunds. And underneath it, built into its foundations, stretching down into the bedrock of the Oregon Valley it sits on, is one of the most significant technological and supernatural constructions in human history. We need to talk about the building itself before we talk about what is underneath it. Mystery number 21. The deliberately inconsistent architecture. The show's production team has confirmed in interviews that the Mystery Shack was intentionally designed to be architecturally impossible. The layout changes between episodes. Rooms that should be on one side of the building are on another. The exterior dimensions do not match the interior square footage. Hallways lead to places that should not be accessible from their starting point. The building has more rooms than a building of its apparent size should contain. And those rooms have relationships to each other that do not obey standard spatial logic. Some of this is normal animation inconsistency. Cartoon shows are not always perfectly spatially coherent. But the production team made the conscious choice that the shack should feel like a labyrinthine, ever-shifting space with scores of hidden rooms and nooks. That is a creative choice, and it has implications. If the shack is built on a dimensional hotspot, if the underlying dimensional instability of the valley affects the physical space above it, then a building sitting directly on top of Ford's portal could plausibly have interior spaces that do not behave the way normal buildings behave. The rooms could be larger on the inside than the outside suggests. The corridors could shift. The spatial logic could be wrong in ways that reflect the dimensional wrongness of the ground beneath. Mystery number 22. The totem pole with the periscope. The decorative totem pole standing outside the Mystery Shack contains a hidden surveillance periscope that Stan used to monitor the grounds around the building. This is established late in the series, when Ford modifies the periscope's wiring to broadcast a memory-erasing signal that clears out the government agents surrounding the property. The totem pole was originally a simple antenna tower that Stan converted into the totem pole to disguise it while he was converting Ford's research house into the tourist attraction. But here's what this means in terms of the building's history. When Ford built his research house in the Oregon woods in the 1970s, he built an antenna tower, not as decoration, as function. What was that antenna receiving or transmitting? Given that Ford's research was focused on dimensional anomalies and supernatural phenomena, an antenna capable of picking up signals that normal technology cannot detect is entirely consistent. Ford may have been using that antenna to monitor dimensional activity around the valley, to track fluctuations in the supernatural field, to receive transmissions from entities that communicate on frequencies human technology does not normally access. Stan covered it up, but the tower was built for a purpose. Mystery number 23. Ford's private study and the covered paintings of Bill. Before Stan converted the research house into the tourist attraction, Ford had a private study accessible by elevator from the underground laboratory. When this study is briefly glimpsed during the show, the viewer can see that it contains multiple covered paintings and sculptures of Bill Cipher. Covered, presumably by Ford, after he realized Bill was his enemy rather than his ally. But the fact that they exist at all, that Ford created this much art depicting Bill, that he surrounded himself with images of the entity who would eventually become his greatest enemy, speaks to the depth of their early collaboration. Ford and Bill were close, not just professionally, not just as researcher and subject. The covered art suggests a relationship that at its peak involved genuine admiration on Ford's part, a kind of reverence for the entity he believed was his intellectual equal and willing partner. The art was not documentation. It was something more personal than that. And the fact that Ford covered it rather than destroyed it suggests that even after everything that happened, he could not quite bring himself to eliminate the record of what they were to each other. Mystery number 24. Project Mentem. In Ford's private study, among the computer equipment and research materials, there's a reference to something called Project Mentem. The name is never explained on screen. Mentem is Latin for mind or thought. Project mind. What was Ford building or studying that required a private project with a Latin name? Given Ford's history with Bill, who entered and manipulated minds, who possessed people through their dreams, who was defeated ultimately through a memory-erasing gambit that operated on the psychological rather than the physical, a project focused on the mind seems directly relevant to Ford's attempts to defend himself against Bill's primary mode of attack. Was Project Mentem Ford's attempt to build a defense against psychic intrusion? Was it a means of detecting when someone was inside his mind? Was it connected to the metal plate Ford had surgically implanted in his head? A literal physical barrier to prevent Bill from entering through his dreams? The metal plate is confirmed canon. Ford had a piece of metal put in his skull to block Bill. Project Mentum may be the research program that led to that decision, or it may be something more ambitious, an attempt to extend that protection to others, to develop a technology that could defend Gravity Falls' population from dream-based attack. Mystery number 25, the H hidden throughout the shack. Disney Channel once confirmed in a Facebook post about the show that the letter is hidden in various locations throughout the Mystery Shack. H for Hirsch, the show creator's last name. This is a real-world creator signature embedded in the show's world, similar to the 618 number that appears everywhere. But the H is specifically placed in the shack, the physical building at the center of the story. In the show's own internal logic, what does that repetition mean? Is it graffiti? Is it part of the building's original design? Is it a pattern Ford used as a personal identifier, something equivalent to the six-fingered hand symbol that marks all three journals? The six-fingered hand symbol, Ford's physical identifier because of his polydactyly, appears on all three journals and throughout his research materials. Ford was deliberate about leaving his mark on his work. The H's in the shack, if they predate Stan's tenure, could be Ford's signature in a different form, something more casual than the journal mark, hidden in the building the way he hid invisible ink in his written work. Or they could be something else entirely. A warning, a message embedded in the architecture of a building that sits on top of a dimensional wound in the earth. Mystery number 26. The cellar door. The Mystery Shack has a cellar door visible under the gift shop window. The show never opens that door on screen. Given that the building already has an underground laboratory, an elevator, a private study, and who knows how many other below-ground spaces, what is in the cellar? The show's production team confirmed the shack was designed to have scores of hidden rooms. The cellar is one of the only clearly visible entry points to an underground space in the shack that is never explored or explained. Given how significant every other underground space in Gravity Falls turns out to be, the unexplored cellar seems like an enormous loose thread. Mystery number 27. The surveillance room in the underground lab. Ford's underground laboratory contains a surveillance room with a monitor showing video feed from the periscope in the totem pole. Stan discovered and used this room during his 30 years alone in the shack, primarily to keep watch for government agents and to monitor his work on the portal. But the surveillance system was Ford's original design, and Ford's surveillance needs were different from Stan's. Ford was watching for something specific. He had built a system to monitor the perimeter of his research property with enough detail to detect whatever might be approaching through the trees. Given Ford's growing paranoia, his awareness that Bill could act through agents, through possessed individuals, through creatures he sent in advance, Ford's surveillance system was likely designed to detect supernatural incursion as much as mundane physical approach, which means it may have been sensitive to things that standard cameras cannot pick up. Whether that capability survives Stan's 3 decades of use and modification is unknown. Mystery number 28. The symbols on the portal console. The portal, the interdimensional gateway that Ford built and that Stan spent 30 years trying to reactivate, has a specific symbol on its control console that caused the burn mark on Stan's hand when he first activated it. That symbol is Ford's mark, the six-fingered hand. Stan pressed his five-fingered hand against a control mechanism built for a six-fingered hand, and the resulting wrong contact caused an electrical burn that left a permanent scar. This is incidentally one of the show's most elegant pieces of symbolism. Stan bearing on his body the permanent mark of trying to do something his brother was supposed to do, occupying his brother's life, carrying the weight of his brother's absence in literal flesh. But it is also a practical question. The portal was built by Ford, calibrated to Ford's specific six-fingered physiology. Every activation using Stan's hand was a physical misalignment. Did that misalignment affect the portal's calibration? Did 30 years of activation attempts by the wrong-handed man leave any trace in the machine's fundamental design? When Ford finally came back through the portal, did he find a machine that had been slowly changed by his brother's imperfect use of it? Mystery number 29. What Stan actually knew. Throughout the first season of the show, Stan is presented as a man with secrets but relatively limited understanding of the supernatural. He uses the journals as functional tools. He needs the specific codes in them to activate the portal, and he uses them for exactly that, methodically. But various details scattered across both seasons suggest Stan knew more about the town's weirdness than he let on. He was not scared by things that should have been terrifying. He knew how to navigate around certain supernatural dangers with an ease that suggested familiarity rather than ignorance. His response to Dipper's discoveries in the early episodes is protective rather than disbelieving. He does not tell Dipper the supernatural does not exist. He tells Dipper to stay out of it. Stan had been living in that building for 30 years. He had been going through the vending machine entrance into the underground lab for 30 years. In 3 decades in a town like Gravity Falls, even a man doing everything he could to focus on the portal and ignore everything else would have had encounters, experiences, information he absorbed simply through proximity and time. What did Stan accumulate in 30 years that he never told anyone? Mystery number 30. The vending machine code. The code to access the underground laboratory through the vending machine is a specific sequence. The published lore gives it as AB1C3. This is not a random sequence. Those are not the first things you would try if you were guessing. Ford built this code with specific intent, and the specific pattern of letters and numbers suggests a reference to something and a date, a cipher key, a personal phrase abbreviated beyond recognition. Ford built security into everything. The code to his most sensitive workspace would have been chosen for a reason, not randomly generated. What is the code a reference to? The alchemical symbols on the back of Journal 3 also encode this access information. Composition, pulverization, digestion, fusion, which means Ford embedded the key to his laboratory in the decoration of the most visible journal. It was hidden in plain sight in a system old enough that a modern scientist would be unlikely to recognize it without specific knowledge of alchemical notation. Ford was hiding things in nested layers, each layer requiring different knowledge to penetrate. He was building a security system from the knowledge required to navigate it, not from locks and passwords. Section 4. Bill Cipher. The questions that outlast the apocalypse. Bill Cipher is the most important character in Gravity Falls who is not a Pines. He is the entity around whom every other mystery orbits. He is the reason the journals exist. He is the reason the portal was built. He is the reason Gravity Falls nearly ceased to exist as a coherent physical location. He is the reason Stan's memories were erased and then painstakingly rebuilt. He is the reason the town carries its scars. And even after the Book of Bill, published in 2024 and written from Bill's perspective, there are things about this entity that remain genuinely, maybe permanently unclear. Let us start from the beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but Bill's beginning. Mystery number 31. What was Euclidia? Bill Cipher comes from a dimension called Euclidia, also referred to as the second dimension. The show and supplementary materials describe it as a world of flat minds and two-dimensional ideas, a reality without depth, without the third spatial dimension that our universe considers fundamental. Bill grew up there, if growing up is even a meaningful concept for a being like Bill. He developed consciousness and intelligence and eventually a kind of desire that two-dimensional existence could not satisfy. What was Euclidia actually like? What was it like to live there? The show gives us essentially nothing about this except the fact that Bill got bored and burned it all down, killing everyone he had ever known, including his own parents. But Euclidia had a population. It had people, or beings that functioned as people in whatever way a two-dimensional existence allows. It had social structures, presumably, relationships, communities, history. And one day, without warning, the smartest being that dimension had ever produced decided it had to go. The Axolotl's poem about Bill, delivered through a hidden link in the Choose Your Own Adventure book, says that Bill saw his own dimension burn and misses home, cannot return. He is a liar, the poem says, when he claims to be happy. So Bill misses Euclidia. He is not happy. The destruction of his home dimension was not a triumphant liberation that left him satisfied. There is grief in this cosmic catastrophe, tangled up inextricably with the act of someone who burned everything down and then had to live with the ash. What was in Euclidia that Bill misses? What did he lose when he destroyed it? Was there someone in that dimension he cared about? Some being whose loss lives in Bill, despite everything he claims about not caring? The poem suggests yes. The poem suggests that underneath the gleeful chaos and the cheerful cruelty, Bill Cipher is a being in mourning for something he himself destroyed. That is not an answer. That is a story that the show never had time to tell. Mystery number 32. The dimension between the second and third. After destroying Euclidia, Bill moved to the Nightmare Realm, the dimension from which he would eventually attempt to conquer the physical world. But the Nightmare Realm is not adjacent to Euclidia in any obvious dimensional geography. Bill traveled. He moved from his destroyed home through some intermediate space to the location from which he could perceive and begin to influence the third dimension. What is that journey like for a being like Bill? How does a two-dimensional entity navigate a multi-dimensional space? What did Bill encounter between Euclidia and the Nightmare Realm? The show implies that Bill spent trillions of years in the Nightmare Realm before focusing his attention on Gravity Falls. Trillions of years is a span of time so vast it is genuinely incomprehensible. It is longer than the current age of the universe. In that time, Bill did things. He made deals. He found allies. The creatures who would become his hench maniacs during Weirdmageddon, entities who knew Bill personally and chose to follow him, were presumably acquired during this incomprehensibly long period. The history of Bill during those trillions of years is almost entirely blank, except for the human civilization appearances in Egypt and early America referenced in Ford's journal notes. Mystery number 33. How did Bill find Ford? This is one of the show's central backstory questions, and it is answered partially but not completely. The standard account is that Ford came to Gravity Falls, began researching its supernatural density, and attempted to summon an entity whose existence he had deduced from the valley's anomalies. His attempt failed. He could not complete the summoning ritual. But Bill found Ford in his dreams anyway, presenting himself as a helpful and knowledgeable companion. The show implies Ford's research made enough noise in whatever dimension Bill was watching from that Bill noticed and decided to investigate. But the Book of Bill adds detail here. Bill had specific reasons to target Ford, specific things about Ford's mind and situation that made him the ideal candidate for the partnership Bill was engineering. Ford's isolation, his estrangement from his brother, his brilliance that had never been properly recognized, his hunger to be understood by someone as smart as himself. Bill shaped himself into exactly what Ford needed and appeared at exactly the right moment. That degree of precision suggests surveillance. Bill was watching Ford for a long time before the dreams began. From within the Nightmare Realm, through whatever mechanism allows dimensional entities to observe the physical world, Bill was studying a physicist in New Jersey, following him to Oregon, monitoring his research, waiting for the moment when Ford's vulnerability and ambition aligned perfectly with Bill's needs. That long, patient observation, the years of watching before a single dream was sent, is a different kind of horror than the flamboyant chaos of Weird Mageddon. Mystery number 34. What deal did Ford actually make with Bill? The show establishes that Ford and Bill had a working partnership for a period of years, during which Ford built the portal and Bill provided intellectual assistance and possibly physical assistance in the form of nocturnal possession. But the nature of their formal arrangement, what Ford gave, what Bill received, what the specific terms were, is deliberately obscured. Ford understood eventually that he had been manipulated. He understood that the portal was never about helping Ford understand the universe. It was always about opening a pathway for Bill. But at the moment of the original agreement, what did Ford believe he was agreeing to? What did Bill offer? What did Ford understand himself to be providing in exchange? The details of that deal matter enormously because the deals Bill makes are never simple and never one-directional. There's always something extracted, always something given up, always a term that runs longer than the surface agreement implies. What was Ford's term? Mystery number 35. The nature of Bill's power and its limits. Bill is consistently described as one of the most powerful entities in existence, and his feats during Weird Mageddon bear this out. He defeats and vaporizes Time Baby, who controls time itself and whose destruction Bill notes is supposed to be impossible, with what appears to be minimal effort. He takes physical form, reshapes reality in a bubble around Gravity Falls, turns people into stone tapestries, and generally demonstrates an ability to alter the physical world at will once he has a body. But he has limits that the show establishes and never fully explains. He cannot escape the geographical boundary around Gravity Falls. He cannot directly attack the Mystery Shack once it is protected by unicorn hair. He cannot possess anyone who has not physically shaken his hand. He cannot destroy a human memory without experiencing something described as burning pain, the first pain he has ever encountered, that he does not find funny. These are not arbitrary limits. They have internal logic. They each point towards something specific about Bill's nature and the rules that govern entities like him. The cannot possess without handshake limitation is the most interesting. It means that Bill's most fundamental power, the ability to inhabit and control other beings, requires explicit consent, or at least a physical acknowledgement. The handshake is a form of agreement. Bill cannot simply take a body. He needs the gesture of mutual contact. This is an ancient and consistent element of folklore about deals with supernatural entities, the formal gesture that seals the exchange, embedded in the show's internal logic. But if Bill cannot possess without a handshake, then every possession in the show required a moment where the possessed person physically agreed to contact with Bill. What exactly were the terms of those moments for each possessed person? Mystery number 36. The eye. Bill has one eye, he wears a top hat, he wears a bow tie. The Eye of Providence symbol on the back of American currency is, within the show's universe, modeled after Bill rather than the other way around. His single eye is his most distinctive feature and also his most obvious weak point. Stan literally punches it during their final confrontation, and it causes Bill visible, genuine pain, described as an excruciating sensitivity. Why does an entity who can reshape physical reality have a vulnerable eye? What is the eye for? Bill does not use it for sight in any conventional way. He can see in all directions, through time, across dimensions. The eye appears to be something more fundamental, possibly the physical locus of his consciousness, the point through which his dimensional existence is anchored in whatever form he takes. If you damage the eye, you damage the anchor. That interpretation is supported by the way the memory ray affects Bill during Stan's final gambit. The memories being erased cause Bill a burning sensation, the only pain he finds unfunny. If the eye is Bill's consciousness anchor, and memories are the substance of consciousness, then attacking someone's memories from the inside while Bill occupies them is attacking Bill at the same level. The level of what he actually is rather than the physical form he has temporarily borrowed. Mystery number 37. The axolotl. The axolotl is the most powerful entity introduced in the Gravity Falls universe outside of Bill himself, and the show never explains what the axolotl is. A giant talking salamander existing in the space between time and space, capable of reaching into the future and the past in the spaces between dimensions, who speaks in cryptic poetry and apparently has the authority to grant redemption to beings who have committed cosmic crimes. The axolotl's poem about Bill suggests that Bill invoked the axolotl at some point, presumably during or after his destruction in Stan's mind, and that the axolotl heard him. The Book of Bill reveals that this invocation led to Bill being placed in the Theraprism, an interdimensional rehabilitation facility outside of space and time. This is the axolotl adjudicating Bill's fate. This is a being powerful enough to impose consequences on an entity who defeated Time Baby without visible effort. What is the axolotl? Is it a natural feature of the multiverse? The conscience of reality? The mechanism by which cosmic debts are balanced? Sound? Is it a single being or a category of being? The poem says Bill's crime could be absolved only through taking a different form in a different time, which sounds very much like reincarnation, like the axolotl having the ability to reset a being's existence and give it a new beginning. Does the axolotl do this regularly? Are there other entities in the multiverse that the axolotl has similarly sent to rehabilitation? Is the entire process of beings like Bill being created, living, destroying things, being absolved, and being reformed? Is that a system? Is the axolotl its administrator? Mystery number 38, The Book of Bill's Ending. The Book of Bill, published in 2024, ends with Bill apparently planning to return. The book itself is framed as Bill's creation, made during arts and crafts at the Theraprism, and sent to the physical world so that whoever reads it might help free him. The book contains a reader participation element, where reading the book and engaging with its puzzles is framed, within the fiction, as potentially contributing to Bill's escape. This is a metafictional move by Alex Hirsch that is also, in a real-world sense, a perpetual cliffhanger. The book ends without closure on whether Bill has escaped or will escape or has already escaped in some form. The reversed audio at the end of Weirdmageddon, Bill's final words decoded, Raxolotl, my time has come to burn. I invoke the ancient power that I may return. He invoked the axolotl. He is in the Theraprism. He made a book. He sent it out. And now it is in readers' hands. What happens next? Officially, we do not know. Unofficially, the suggestion is that something happens next, and that whatever it is, it will not be good for anyone who shook Bill's hand. Mystery number 39. Bill and the Eye of Providence on Currency. If the Eye of Providence on American currency is within the Gravity Falls universe, an acknowledgement by Bill's followers of their failure to open a portal for him, then the founding mythology of the United States is entangled with the same triangular entity that nearly destroyed a small Oregon town in the 1980s through collaborative research and again in 2012 through dimensional catastrophe. George Washington, the founding of the Republic, the design of the Great Seal. All of it happened in the shadow of a deal that did not go through. The American founding myth contains minds, In this reading, a hidden layer about what the founders were trying to do and why their attempt failed. This is not a conspiracy theory about the real world. It is lore embedded in the show's universe about the history of that universe's United States. But it does raise a fascinating question. How many other moments of apparent historical significance in the Gravity Falls universe were actually failed or partial negotiations with Bill? How many events, discoveries, disasters were set in motion by a triangular entity trying different approaches to the same fundamental goal? Mystery number 40. Bill's relationship to the Eye of Providence concept generally. The show implies that in its universe, the Eye of Providence symbol, which appears in cultures ranging from ancient Egypt to 18th century America, originated as an acknowledgement of Bill rather than as an independent human symbolic tradition. But the specific geometry of Bill, a triangle with an eye, appears in human symbolic traditions as far back as Egyptian iconography, long before America existed. Did Bill appear to the Egyptians as well? Ford's notes suggest yes, and the pyramid shape, the three-dimensional version of a triangle, the most stable geometric solid, the shape that has dominated human construction and symbolism for thousands of years? Is it a coincidence that the shape associated with Bill throughout human history is also the shape that civilizations across the world independently chose for their most significant monuments? Section 5. Dipper and Mabel, the twins' own mysteries. The twins at the center of Gravity Falls are so well drawn, so lovable, so meticulously observed as characters, that it is easy to focus on them as emotional anchors and miss the genuine mysteries they carry with them. Mystery number 41. Dipper's real name. The show establishes that Dipper Pines is a nickname. His real name is Mason. Mason Pines. He has been called Dipper since early childhood because of the birthmark on his forehead, shaped like the Big Dipper constellation. And by the events of the show, the nickname has so thoroughly replaced the real name that even the adults in his family mostly use it. The published Journal 3 confirms this. Mason is the name, Dipper is the identity. But why Mason? The name Mason, a person who builds with stone, carries certain resonances in the context of a show where secret societies, ancient symbols, and occult traditions are part of the background. Freemasonry uses the symbolic language of stone cutting as a metaphor for moral and spiritual development. The Eye of Providence on American currency is sometimes associated with Masonic symbolism. The show certainly knew what it was doing by giving the main character, the boy who decodes ciphers and investigates the unknown, a birth name that rhymes with the symbolic tradition that Bill Cipher was apparently associated with through the Founding Fathers. Whether this is meaningful within the show's universe or simply a clever creator reference is never clarified, but it is a very specific choice of name. Mystery number 42. The Shooting Star Birthmark. Mabel does not have a birthmark that the show highlights the way it highlights Dipper's Big Dipper constellation mark. But Mabel's zodiac symbol on the cipher wheel is the shooting star. In a show that pays very careful attention to the relationship between symbols and identity, the shooting star assigned to Mabel as her protective symbol, her identity within the cosmic framework of the prophecy, was presumably not random. Stars that shoot across the sky are transient, bright, intense, burning up in the atmosphere. They are wish fulfillment objects. They are also scientifically destruction, a fragment of rock traveling at impossible speed through conditions that vaporize it. Mabel is the emotional core of the family, the one whose optimism holds everyone together, the one who makes everyone feel something. She is also the one whose impulsive belief in goodness nearly derailed everything. She trusted Bill, disguised as a helpful entity, and broke the rift container, triggering Weirdmageddon, The shooting star is beautiful and dangerous, and brief and crucial, all at once. Was the symbol given to Mabel because she embodies it, or does the symbol shape something about who she is in ways the show never explores? Mystery number 43. The twins' parents. The twins' parents send them to Gravity Falls for the summer and are essentially absent from the entire show. A few brief phone calls, a few offhand references, and then nothing. For a show that is deeply invested in parent-child relationships, Ford and Stan's relationship with their father is a significant backstory element. Seuss's abandonment by his father is a major emotional arc. Pacifica's relationship with her controlling parents drives an entire episode. The complete narrative erasure of Dipper and Mabel's parents is conspicuous. Are they ordinary people who simply do not know their children are investigating supernatural catastrophes all summer? That seems implausible given that after Weirdmageddon, the entire town of Gravity Falls is visibly damaged, and the twins themselves are clearly different people than they were when they arrived. Or are their parents aware at some level that Gravity Falls changes things? Did their parents send them there specifically because of what they knew about the town? Is there a Pines family knowledge of Gravity Falls that goes deeper than Stan's lone wolf 30-year project? Mystery number 44. Dipper and the journal's continued effect on him. At the end of the show, Dipper and Mabel leave Gravity Falls and go home. The three journals are thrown into the bottomless pit. The summer is over. But Dipper spent an entire summer reading, annotating, and carrying a journal that Bill Cipher previously possessed. A journal with invisible ink passages written by Bill while he occupied Ford's body. A journal that contains knowledge Ford specifically warned should not be widely shared. Dipper absorbed that knowledge. He read things children should not read. He decoded messages that pointed toward the existence of cosmic entities, dimensional portals, and the vulnerability of human consciousness to external manipulation. What does Dipper do with that knowledge once he is back in his regular life? The show ends before that question can be answered. Dipper goes home, presumably resumes middle school, and carries inside himself an understanding of the universe's architecture that essentially no one else his age possesses. Is that weight bearable? The show suggests yes, that the summer made both twins stronger and more capable. But it also suggests, through the journey itself, that that knowledge is not neutral. Knowing what Dipper knows changes how you see everything. Mystery number 45. Mabel's Bubble. During Weirdmageddon, Mabel is trapped in a bubble, a sphere of reality created by Bill and sealed between the floating cliffs. Inside the bubble is a version of reality, shaped entirely by Mabel's own wishes. A world where summer never ends, where everyone loves her, where she never has to face growing up or separating from her brother or accepting the difficulties of the real world. It is explicitly designed to be a trap that Mabel chooses to stay in, because the alternative is facing things she does not want to face. When Dipper enters the bubble to rescue Mabel, he realizes that the hardest part of the rescue is not fighting his way through the false reality. It is convincing Mabel to leave it voluntarily. Mabel has to choose to exit a world where everything is perfect and re-enter a world where things are difficult and endings are real. She does. She chooses the real, imperfect world. But the question of what that bubble showed Mabel about herself, about her deepest fears and wishes, about what she would construct if she had unlimited power to arrange reality, is something the show gestures toward without fully examining. The bubble contained Mabel's ideal reality. Her ideal reality included her friends, her creativity, her brother, summer that never ends. But it also included, apparently, a version of her brother who was not pulling away from her toward growing up and new experiences. The thing Mabel was most afraid of was not Bill or Weirdmageddon. It was the normal passage of time and the distance that growing up creates between people who love each other. That fear is honest and earned and beautifully observed. It is also never resolved exactly. The show ends with Mabel choosing reality, but not with Mabel fully at peace with what reality requires. Mystery number 46, the twins' birthday, and the number 13. Dipper and Mabel turned 13 on August 31st, the last day of summer in Gravity Falls. Their summer in the town is framed as the last summer of childhood, the last summer before the complexity and self-awareness of adolescence fully arrives. The birthday falls at the end of the summer, after everything, as a kind of punctuation mark. They arrived as 12-year-olds and they leave as 13-year-olds. Everything that happened between those two numbers is the story. But 13 is also a number with extensive supernatural significance in multiple traditions. The number associated with bad luck, with the outsider, with the threshold between ordinary and uncanny. The twins crossed through Gravity Falls at the age most associated in folk tradition with the liminal, the dangerous, the transitional. Whether this is intentional thematic symbolism or lore that carries meaning within the show's universe is left deliberately unclear. Mystery number 47. What happened to the twins afterward, really? The show ends with Dipper and Mabel boarding a bus back to their regular life, waving goodbye to Gravity Falls. Ford and Stan are about to sail around the world together, repairing their 60-year estrangement one ocean at a time. Souz is the new manager of the Mystery Shack. Wendy will be back for winter break. Everything is good. Everything is moving forward. But the show is very carefully vague about what the future actually holds. There are no flash forwards. There is no time jump. We see the twins on the bus, we see the town recede, and then the show is over. The implication is that summer is ending, but the twins' relationship with the supernatural is not. Dipper especially has been changed at a fundamental level. His interest in the paranormal is not a phase. He did not leave Gravity Falls and go back to being a normal kid who forgets strange things happened one summer. He is the kind of person who annotated Ford's journal with his own observations, and who, by the end of the show, is already thinking about what comes next. What does come next for Dipper? Ford offered to take him on as an apprentice, to travel the world's supernatural hotspots together, to continue the research the journals represent. Dipper was genuinely tempted. He turned it down because Mabel. But he turned it down for that summer, for that moment. The question of whether he eventually found a path to that research, whether he and Ford eventually worked together in some capacity, is left entirely open. Mystery number 48. Mabel's supernatural talent. Mabel demonstrates throughout the show a kind of instinctive supernatural competence that is distinct from Dipper's book-learning approach. She navigated situations through empathy and creativity and charm rather than coded knowledge, and this worked. Sometimes it worked better than Dipper's approach. Her ability to talk to unicorns, to negotiate with supernatural entities through sheer force of personality, to hold the Mystery Shack's supernatural community together during Weirdmageddon, these are not just good social skills. Something about Mabel seems to resonate with the supernatural in a way that is never examined. The show does not frame Mabel as having a power. It frames her as having a personality. But in a universe where the cipher wheel identifies every significant person with a symbol, and where symbols have metaphysical weight, Mabel's shooting star is an active designation, not just a cute metaphor. What does it mean for someone to be the shooting star in the cosmic framework of Gravity Falls? Does that designation carry any ongoing implications? Mystery number 49. Dipper's pine tree and how he got it. Dipper's hat, the one with the pine tree symbol, is present from the first episode. He is wearing it when he arrives. The pine tree is his zodiac symbol. The hat is just a hat, a regular object he chose to wear. but the hat carries his symbol. He found the symbol before he found the show. He was already marked before he found Journal 3. The pine tree appears on his hat before anyone could have told him his symbol was the pine tree. Is this a coincidence? Did Dipper simply like the hat and the symbol is a coincidence? Or did something draw him to that hat above? The same weirdness that drew his great uncle to Gravity Falls, the same dimensional pull that seems to operate on the Pines family as a whole? Because it recognized him as the pine tree before he recognized himself? Mystery number 50. Who first connected the Pines family to Gravity Falls? The summer visit happens because Stan invited the twins. Stan invited the twins because he needed help running the Mystery Shack. But why did Stan have the Mystery Shack to begin with? He had the Mystery Shack because Ford built a house in Gravity Falls. And Ford went to Gravity Falls because his research led him there. The chain of causation traces back through Stan and Ford and their father, and the original grant that sent Ford to Oregon. But there is another chain of causation that runs parallel to this one, and it is the one Bill Cipher constructed. Bill was watching Ford long before Ford came to Gravity Falls. Bill may have been involved in shaping the conditions that led Ford to apply for the grant, to win it, to choose that specific valley in Oregon as his research site. If Bill can influence dreams and nudge events and make specific ideas seem compelling to specific people, then the entire Pines family's connection to Gravity Falls may have been engineered from the start. The Pines family did not just happen to get involved with the town that happened to contain a dimensional hotspot that happened to be useful to the entity Bill needed to work through. They were potentially selected, chosen, drawn to the valley by the same entity that was already there, waiting. Section 6. Ford and Stan. The Pines brothers and what was left unsaid. Few relationships in animation history carry the emotional complexity of Ford and Stan Pines. Two brothers, identical in appearance, polar opposites in temperament, separated by 60 years of mutual pain and misunderstanding, who find their way back to each other through a series of circumstances that involves dimensional travel, a tourist trap, a dream demon, and the end of the world. The show tells this story beautifully. It does not tell it completely. Mystery number 51. Their father and what really happened. Philbrick Pines, Ford and Stan's father, is shown in flashbacks as a hard, cold, transactional man. When Stan, as a teenager, accidentally breaks a device that Ford had built to win a science competition, shattering Ford's path to college on a scholarship that would have paid for his education, Philbrick throws Stan out of the house. He kicks his own son out of the family home for being clumsy. That is a devastating response to an accident. It is the kind of response that suggests Philbrick had already decided Stan was the expendable one, the failure, the son who did not measure up to the other. And indeed, the show implies that throughout the twins' childhood, Ford was the favored one, the prodigy, the six-fingered wonder, the source of Philbrick's hopes for the family's financial advancement. Stan was just the other one. What made Philbrick that way? What happened to him that made him capable of discarding one son without apparent grief? The show gives us his surface behavior, but not his history. There is a man somewhere behind the cold dismissal, a man who became a father and decided that only one of his sons was worth keeping, and we never see inside that decision. Mystery number 52. Stan's 30 years. After Stan is thrown out of the house and then eventually separated from Ford by the portal accident. The fight that ends with Ford disappearing through the gateway and Stan standing alone in a lab that contained a machine he did not understand, holding a journal he had been told to take away. Stan makes a decision that the show treats as heroic and sad and impossible in equal measure. He decides to bring Ford home. He moves into Ford's house. He converts it into a tourist trap to fund his increasingly expensive and technically demanding project of rebuilding and reactivating a dimensional portal using journals he did not fully understand. And for 30 years, he does not tell anyone. Not the government, not the family, not the people who worked for him. He carries this completely alone. 30 years is a long time to carry a secret that large. What did Stan think about, alone in that lab in the small hours of the night, when the portal hummed and the town slept and the pine trees pressed against the windows? The show gives us glimpses, his pride, his stubbornness, his love for his brother wrapped in decades of accumulated guilt. But the interior experience of that 30-year vigil is largely unaddressed. Stan's inner life during those years is the great unexamined space in the Pines family story. Mystery number 53. What Ford did during 30 years between dimensions. Ford tells the twins and Stan some of his interdimensional adventures during the second season, but he does not tell them everything. He mentions strangely pleasant dimensions and highly illegal dice. He implies a range of experiences spanning decades. He came back speaking multiple languages he had not known when he left, with skills and knowledge he had not possessed before, with scars and a bearing that suggested experiences that marked him in ways he was not prepared to explain to people who had been living in a house with a portal in the basement. 30 years of traveling through multiple dimensions. What did Ford see? What did he find? What worlds exist in the multiverse beyond the handful of references he makes? The show's universe is explicitly multidimensional, with countless alternate realities and dimensional spaces coexisting alongside the standard physical world. Ford had access to that entire space for 30 years. He explored it. He documented it. Where are those documents? Are there journals from the interdimensional years? Did Ford continue his research in other dimensions, documenting the paranormal of entirely different universes? Mystery number 54. The Perpetual Motion Machine. The central catastrophe of Ford and Stan's relationship, the thing that separated them, that broke them apart, that sent Ford to a university far away on a scholarship and sent Stan to the streets, was Stan accidentally destroying a science fair project Ford had built. The project was a perpetual motion machine. Ford had built something that appeared to violate the laws of thermodynamics. A machine that generated more energy than it consumed, or perhaps more precisely, a machine that operated in a loop without winding down. A perpetual motion machine is physically impossible by standard physics. How did Ford build one? Was it actually a perpetual motion machine in the standard sense, or was it something that used a dimensional energy source, something drawing from the nightmare realm or another dimensional space, to appear to produce free energy? Did Ford even understand what he had built? If Ford was already, at the age of 17, drawing on dimensional principles he did not fully comprehend, then his early work on the perpetual motion machine is a precursor to the portal. Another attempt to use dimensional energy before he had the framework to understand what he was accessing. The machine was destroyed before it could be examined. Its secrets went with it. Mystery number 55. Ford's 6 fingers. Polydactyly, having an extra finger or toe, occurs in approximately 1 in every 1,000 people and is in most cases the result of a simple genetic variant. Ford's 6 fingers are presented in the show as a birth defect and a defining physical characteristic, the trait that marks the journals as his, and identifies him as the 6-fingered hand on the zodiac wheel. The show treats it as a mundane biological reality with significant symbolic weight. But the frequency with which Ford's extra fingers are highlighted, as an identifier, as a symbol, as the physical key to mechanisms his journals contain, raises a question about whether polydactyly in Gravity Falls carries any additional significance beyond genetics. Many traditions associate extra fingers with magical or supernatural ability. The symbolism of 6 as opposed to 5 fingers, one above the standard human count, touches old ideas about beings that exist one step outside normal human reality. In a show where every visual detail can mean something, Ford's hands are never casually depicted. Mystery number 56. The years of estrangement between the brothers. Ford and Stan went from being separated by the portal to being reunited in the summer the show depicts. But between Ford's disappearance 30 years before the show and the show's present, there are also the years before the portal. The years when Ford was at university and Stan was on the street. The years when they were not in contact. The years when neither brother knew where the other was or how he was doing. Stan mentions in his backstory that he spent years failing at various ventures, sales, small-time schemes, before eventually finding his way to Ford's house in Oregon. Those years are compacted into a brief montage. The texture of what those years were like, what Stan learned and lost in them, what shaped the particular version of Stanley Pines, who arrived at Ford's door and found a portal and a note, and made the most consequential unilateral decision of his life. All of that is condensed into a few seconds of animation. Stan the Failing. Con artist who eventually found loyalty and purpose is a much richer story than the show had time to tell. He is the show's most complex adult character, precisely because he is the one whose arc runs longest and changes most significantly. And the backstory that produced him is only partially visible. Mystery number 57. Why did Stan never tell anyone? 30 years of secret keeping is extraordinary. Stan's interactions with Wendy and Suze and the various tourists and locals he dealt with every single day of those 30 years required him to maintain a persona. The cheerful scam artist, the goofy great uncle, the guy who runs the tourist trap for fun and mild profit. He could not be the man with a portal in his basement, because if he was that man, someone would investigate. Someone would interfere and Ford might never come home. The discipline required to maintain that performance for 30 years, to never slip, to never tell a single person the truth, even partially, even to people he cared about. That discipline is itself a kind of mystery. Stan is not on the surface a disciplined person. He is impulsive, dramatic, loud. He runs a fraud operation with more enthusiasm than competence. He is the last person who seems capable of keeping a secret for 3 decades. But he did. And the question of how he built that wall around the truth and maintained it even as it cost him and wore him down and kept him isolated from everyone around him is something the show gestures toward but never fully answers. Mystery number 58. The letters between Ford and Stan. After the brothers' reunion and after Weirmageddon, Ford and Stan leave Gravity Falls together on the Stan O'War II, a boat that fulfills their childhood dream of sailing the world. This is the show's happiest ending, the warmest version of things being okay. But the reconciliation it represents is not fully shown. The 30 years of estrangement, the accumulated anger and guilt and grief on both sides, is not dissolved in a single summer's worth of adventure. It is addressed. It is started. But it is not finished. What do Ford and Stan talk about on that boat? What do they say to each other in the dark Pacific nights, miles from any coast? What does Ford tell Stan about the dimensions? What does Stan tell Ford about the 30 years alone in the shack? They both have stories the other has not heard. They both have wounds the other was not there to see. The boat trip is the beginning of a conversation that was 40 years late in starting, and we are not invited to hear it. Section 7. The Portal and Weirmageddon. What actually happened and what it left behind. Mystery number 59. What Ford actually saw when McGucket went into the portal. When Ford and Fiddleford McGucket built the portal and did their first test run, an accident involving a rope sent McGucket partially into the portal's range, head first, before Ford managed to pull him back. In that moment of partial dimensional contact, McGucket glimpsed what was on the other side of the portal. He saw into the space that Bill wanted to use as an entry point into the physical world. What McGucket saw destroyed him, not dramatically, not immediately. But the glimpse broke something inside him that never healed on its own. He spent years afterward using his own memory-erasing ray to remove every image, every fragment of what he had seen, self-medicating against a vision that was too large and too wrong for a human mind to hold. He founded the Society of the Blind Eye. The entire organization was born from his desperate need to forget what was on the other side of the portal. He rebuilt himself as a rambling, incoherent eccentric, specifically because the alternative was being a lucid person who remembered what he had seen. What did he see? The show shows us the screaming horror of what he glimpsed, but does not show us the content of the vision. We know it was bad. We know it was Bill's territory. We know it was something that a brilliant human mind could not integrate and remain functional. But the specific nature of the vision, what images, what entities, what reality, is kept off screen by design. Mystery number 60, the full scope of the dimensional rift. After Ford dismantled the portal following his return, he contained the dimensional rift the portal had created in a small glass container. A crack in the barrier between dimensions, physically compressed into something that could be held in one hand. He warned that if the container were broken, the dimensional rift would be catastrophic. But the portal had been running on and off for 30 years during Stan's attempts to reactivate it. 30 years of partial dimensional activity in the basement of a house in Oregon. The rift was contained in a glass vial, but the effects of 3 decades of dimensional bleed, of the barrier between the physical world and the nightmare realm being repeatedly stressed and partially breached, do not disappear just because the machine is turned off. The valley around the Mystery Shack was already anomalous. The portal presumably made it more so. What was the state of the dimensional boundary around Gravity Falls after 30 years of portal activity before Bill got involved? Mystery number 61. What the Time Baby's death means. Bill vaporized Time Baby during Weirdmageddon. Time Baby is, as the name suggests, an entity who controls time, who exists outside of normal temporal flow, who can enforce paradox avoidance across the timeline, who has an army of temporal police tasked with correcting time stream violations. Bill destroyed him, which means Bill destroyed the entity responsible for managing the integrity of time. After Weirdmageddon was resolved and Bill was defeated, the timeline events listed in the Gravity Falls canon note that Time Baby eventually awakens and conquers the universe in the far future. So Time Baby is not permanently dead. But there is a gap, a period between when Bill destroyed Time Baby and when Time Baby eventually revives, during which the temporal management infrastructure is either offline or operating without its primary administrator. What happened to time during that gap? Did violations of the time stream go unaddressed? Did paradoxes develop? Blendin Blandin, the time traveler from the far future, was present during Weirdmageddon and survived. What did Blendin see during the period when time was unpoliced? Mystery number 62, the Never Mind All That Act. After Weirdmageddon, Mayor Tyler Cutebiker instituted the Never Mind All That Act, which required that if anyone asked what had happened to Gravity Falls during the Weirdmageddon period, all residents must respond with the phrase, "Never mind all that," or risk being tasered. This is played for laughs. It is very on brand for a show that has always treated institutional bureaucracy as faintly absurd, but it raises a genuinely significant question. How does a town process collective trauma when it has been legally prohibited from discussing the cause of that trauma? The residents of Gravity Falls were turned into stone tapestries, subjected to reality distortion, watch their neighbors and buildings and familiar objects come to life and attack them. And then they were told, never mind all that. The collective psychological effects of Weird Mageddon on a town of several hundred people who went through 3 days of genuine apocalyptic conditions and then were told to act normally are not addressed by the show in any depth. Mystery number 63, the eye bats that stayed. After Weird Mageddon was reversed and Bill's influence was expelled from the town, most supernatural intrusions were pushed back into the nightmare realm. But the show's epilogue notes that some eye bats remained on Sprott's farm. This is a small detail delivered in a news report and played as a casual aside, but it is significant. If some of the creatures Bill brought through the rift did not return to the nightmare realm when the rift was sealed, then Gravity Falls after Weird Mageddon contains dimensional refugees. Creatures that do not belong to the standard supernatural ecology of the valley, that arrived via catastrophe and stayed. What happened to those eye bats? Were they eventually removed? Did they integrate into the town's existing supernatural community? Did anyone take responsibility for them? They are surveillance creatures, biological cameras connected originally to Bill's awareness. Are they still transmitting to something after Bill's destruction? Or are they just stray animals wandering Sprott's property and eating whatever eye bats eat? Mystery number 64, Bill's physical form in the finale. The stone statue of Bill Cipher that appears at the end of the show, the one that remains after Weird Mageddon is reversed, is the starting point of the real-world Cipher Hunt ARG, a physical object that was buried in Oregon woods. Within the show's fiction, Bill's physical form was apparently petrified as a result of his defeat within Stan's mind. He is stone. But the Book of Bill implies that petrification is not destruction. Bill is not dead, exactly. He is contained. What is the stone Bill experiencing? Is he aware? Is he waiting? The Book of Bill suggests that awareness persists in some form. Bill's invocation of the axolotl was made at or near the moment of petrification, suggesting consciousness was active right up to or through that moment. Is Bill's awareness sitting inside the stone, patient and planning, unable to act but entirely present? The Cipher Hunt warned those who found the statue, whatever you do, do not shake its hand. Mystery number 65. What powers the barrier that confines Weird Mageddon? The barrier that prevents Bill from escaping Gravity Falls during Weird Mageddon is connected to Ford's equation, the mathematical description of the dimensional physics of the area. Ford calculates that if Bill could get someone to tell him the equation that collapses the barrier, Weird Mageddon could spread globally. Bill spends much of the Weird Mageddon arc trying to get that equation from Ford. But the barrier exists independently of Ford's calculation of it. Ford's equation describes the barrier. It did not create it. The barrier is something that was already there, something natural to the geography or the dimensional structure of the valley. Ford's equation is a description of a pre-existing phenomenon, which means the phenomenon itself has a different origin, either the ancient crash or the same forces that made the valley a supernatural hotspot, or something else entirely that Ford's physics could describe but could not explain an origin. Section 8. The supporting cast. Hidden depths and unresolved threads. Mystery number 66. Soos and his father. Jesus Alzamirano Ramirez, known universally as Soos, is the emotional heart of the Mystery Shack staff and one of the show's most genuinely warm characters. His arc involving his absent father, a father who sent birthday cards year after year but never appeared, who eventually fails to show up for a scheduled visit, who is revealed to be a man who simply cannot deal with the responsibility of parenthood, is one of the show's most quietly devastating emotional storylines. The episode Blendon's Game, which involves time travel to Seuss's past and the revelation of his father's abandonment, is one of the show's bleakest and most mature pieces of writing. Seuss's grandmother, Abuelita, raised him. The Mystery Shack and its inhabitants became his family. And then, at the end of the show, Seuss becomes the Mystery Shack's new manager. Stan gives him the shack, which is the most significant thing Stan has to give. But Seuss's father is never confronted. He is never shown changing. The wound is real, and it is acknowledged, and it shapes Seuss profoundly. But the person who caused it simply exists off-screen in perpetuity, never held accountable, never resolved into anything. That is honest. That is true to life. Parents who cannot parent do not generally transform into adequate parents off-screen just because the story requires closure. But it is also a genuinely open wound in the show's emotional landscape, a thread that goes wherever Suze goes after the summer ends. Mystery number 67, Wendy's Complexity. Wendy Corduroy is presented initially as the cool older teenager whom Dipper has a crush on. Over time, she is revealed to be a character of real depth, adventurous, fiercely capable, burdened by a family. The Corduroy brothers are all enormous, wild loggers who treat danger as entertainment, and dealing with her own complicated inner life that the show gestures toward but rarely examines in sustained detail. In a deleted scene, Wendy writes in a diary that Gravity Falls is the strangest summer of her life, but also the most alive she has ever felt. That the weirdness was something she thrived in rather than suffered through. This was cut, but it points toward a version of Wendy who was having her own supernatural adventure in parallel to the twins, processing and engaging with the valley's strangeness on her own terms. How much had Wendy seen before Dipper arrived? How many strange things had she encountered in her years in Gravity Falls that never made it into the main narrative? Mystery number 68, Pacifica Northwest and the Bell. In the episode Northwest Mansion Mystery, one of the show's most emotionally complex outings, Pacifica Northwest is established as a character with hidden depth beneath her initially shallow, rich girl presentation. Her parents control her behavior through a bell. They trained her to obedience through conditioning, a detail that the episode reveals with genuinely disturbing matter-of-factness. When her father rings a bell, Pacifica flinches and complies. She has been conditioned like an animal to respond to an auditory cue. At the end of the episode, after Pacifica makes her choice to open the manor to the townspeople and break her family's generational cycle of selfishness, the bell is nowhere to be seen. By the end of the show, when Pacifica's family is bankrupt and her father is making terrible decisions and everything her parents built has collapsed, Pacifica is clearly different, less afraid, more self-possessed, standing up to her father in ways that would have been unthinkable at the start of the show. But the bell's absence is symbolic, not confirmed. Did Pacifica destroy it? Did she simply move past its power? Did the conditioning disappear when the episode's emotional resolution happened? Or does it remain somewhere in her nervous system, a reflex waiting for a trigger? And beyond the bell, what is Pacifica going to do with her life now that her family's fortune is gone and her social position has collapsed? The show does not answer this. Mystery number 69, Old Man McGucket's Recovered Memory. After the events of the show, McGucket regains his sanity when his repressed memories are fully processed and no longer requiring suppression. He recalls what he saw in the portal. He recalls the entire sequence of events that led to his self-destruction. He becomes, by the epilogue, a wealthy man living in the Northwest Mansion with his son, having sold his patents to the government. But he remembers. He knows what is in the nightmare realm. He is, as of the show's end, one of the very few people in Gravity Falls who has directly perceived what exists on the other side of the dimensional boundary. He and Ford share that knowledge. What do they do with it? They are both brilliant scientists with direct experience of dimensional entities. Do they collaborate? Do they compare notes on what they saw? Does McGucket's specific vision, the one that broke him for decades, reveal anything about the nightmare realm that Ford's research did not capture? Mystery number 70, Gideon's supernatural talent. Gideon Gleeful, the show's primary season 1 antagonist, possessed a supernatural amulet stolen from a mysterious source that gave him genuine psychic powers. When the amulet was destroyed, his powers went with it. He was revealed to be a child whose apparent gifts were entirely borrowed from a stolen object. But here's the thing, Gideon knew about Journal 2. He found it as a child in a school setting, which means either the journal wound up there through some specific chain of events, or it was placed there deliberately by someone who knew Gideon would find it, who knew Gideon had the interest and temperament to study it obsessively. Gideon also successfully summoned Bill Cipher's attention, or at least succeeded in attracting it. Though the summoning ritual itself failed, Bill chose to appear to Gideon and make a deal. Bill is not generous with his time. He does not respond to every summoning. He responds to people who are useful to his purposes. What did Bill see in Gideon? What made Gideon worth a personal appearance rather than a dismissal? Was Gideon's supernatural talent, his quick learning, his confidence, his ambition, something Bill recognized as potentially useful? Gideon post-Reformation, with his intelligence and his Gravity Falls knowledge and whatever residual understanding of supernatural dynamics he accumulated from Journal 2, is he more dangerous or more capable than the show gave him credit for? Mystery number 71, the Society of the Blind Eye membership. The Society of the Blind Eye, McGuckett's memory-erasing organization, operated for years as Gravity Falls' unofficial management system for supernatural encounters, going out at night and erasing the memories of anyone who had witnessed something paranormal. The society had a membership drawn from the town's population, regular people who had been recruited or volunteered. Those members, after the society was dissolved when McGuckett recovered and exposed the organization, presumably had their own erased memories restored, or simply went on without them. Some of those members would have had years of memories removed, chunks of their past simply absent, holes in their own history. The show treats the society's dissolution as an uncomplicated good. The truth was suppressed, and now it does not have to be. But the members of the society who had their own memories repeatedly erased, who volunteered to forget things, and then forgot more than they volunteered, they are living with incomplete personal histories in a town where the ground itself sometimes stops being normal. Mystery number 72, the Northwest family's supernatural contracts. The Northwests made a deal with a ghost. The show establishes this and resolves the immediate consequences within Northwest Mansion mystery. But there are implications in Ford's journal notes about other agreements the family made with other supernatural entities. The Northwest family's social position was maintained not just through wealth and manipulation, but through active supernatural support, arrangements with beings who had reasons to keep the Northwest family in power. After the family is bankrupted by Preston Northwest's decision to invest in Bill's weirdness bonds and then immediately see those bonds become worthless when Weirdmageddon ended, after the mansion is sold and the fortune is gone, what happens to those other supernatural arrangements? Do the beings the Northwests contracted with consider the agreement void now that the family can no longer deliver whatever they were delivering? Do supernatural debts carry over to the next generation, even when the fortune does not? Mystery number 73, Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Durland. The show's comic relief law enforcement duo go through a gradual, almost entirely understated arc over the course of both seasons that ends with the epilogue revealing them as apparently in love, going mad with power together after Weirdmageddon and openly delighted with each other. This is played warmly and sweetly and quickly, and then the show moves on. But Blubbs and Durland are the law enforcement of Gravity Falls. They have been dealing with or actively ignoring the town's supernatural reality for their entire careers. The degree to which they know what is actually happening in their jurisdiction, whether they chose ignorance or were subjected to memory erasure or simply developed the pragmatic denial of people who live surrounded by impossible things, is never addressed. They are played for laughs, but underneath the comedy is a pair of people who have chosen to be law enforcement in the most unusual jurisdiction in America. Mystery number 74. Form. Grenda and Candy's futures. Mabel's best friends in Gravity Falls. Grenda, the large, boisterous, romantically successful girl, and Candy, the quiet, observant one with a deadpan streak, are supporting characters with personalities distinct enough to carry their own stories. Both were present for significant supernatural events over the summer. Both formed genuine connections with supernatural or unusual entities. Candy has a notable interaction with the multi-bear. Grenda ends up in a relationship with Marius von Funshauser, an elderly Austrian diplomat she meets during the events of Northwest Mansion Mystery. Grenda's relationship with an adult Austrian man, while played for comedy, has some logistics the show does not address. And Candy's romantic arc across the season, including her brief mutual connection with Dipper, before he inevitably returns to pining over Wendy, suggests a character with emotional depth that gets compressed into supporting character space. Where do these girls go after summer ends? What do they tell their parents about the summer? Do they maintain their supernatural awareness, or does the community memory erasure that happens at a broad level, the never mind all that act, apply to them as well? Section 9. The Cipher Wheel and the Prophecy. The Bill Cipher Zodiac is one of the show's most elaborate structural mysteries, and it is one where the creative origin and the in-universe meaning are fascinatingly distinct. Understanding both layers makes the whole thing stranger. The Zodiac flashes briefly at the end of the opening theme every episode. Surrounding a circle are 10 symbols. At the center is a blank space where the show implies an 11th element was always present. The blue flame, the element of Bill himself. The prophecy connected to the Zodiac is that if 10 specific individuals stood on the 10 symbols and joined hands to form a human energy circuit, the combined power of their connection would be sufficient to destroy Bill. This is powerful. This is poetic. And it almost worked. Mystery number 75. Why the prophecy failed. In the finale, Ford reveals the Zodiac and the prophecy to the assembled survivors of Weirdmageddon. The 10 symbols represent 10 individuals who are all present in the Mystery Shack. They stand on their symbols. They begin to join hands. And then Stan and Ford, who have spent 60 years hurting each other, who reunited only weeks ago, who have not resolved the deep well of old anger between them, get into a fight, and the circuit breaks before it can be completed. The prophecy did not fail because of a supernatural intervention. It failed because of a human one. Two brothers who love each other but have not finished being angry at each other could not hold hands for long enough. The emotional reality of their relationship, the weight of decades of distance and silence and blame, was literally the mechanism of the world's near destruction. This is one of the show's deepest themes. The idea that the supernatural catastrophes in Gravity Falls are, at the bottom, reflections of human emotional failures. Bill could not break the Zodiac directly. Only the people in it could break it by failing to connect. And the most damaged relationship in the room, the one most in need of repair, was the one that broke at the critical moment. But here's the unresolved mystery. What would have happened if the Zodiac had worked? Would Bill have been truly, permanently destroyed? The show presents an alternate method of defeating Bill, erasing Stan's memory to erase Bill with it. that also succeeds, at least in removing Bill from the physical world and ending Weird Mageddon. But the Zodiac was described as a way to defeat Bill, which sounds more absolute than what actually happened. The memory erasure sent Bill to the Theraprism. The Zodiac, if it had worked, might have done something different, something more final, or something entirely different from the Theraprism outcome. Mystery number 76. The Zodiac's ancient origin. The Zodiac symbol was known to the ancient inhabitants of the Gravity Falls Valley hundreds of years ago. They used it once to defeat Bill in a previous incursion and left behind a painting and a warning. Ford discovered this painting and spent considerable time analyzing it before accidentally summoning Bill in his dreams. But the ancient inhabitants did not write down what the Zodiac cost them to use. They depicted the fight. They depicted the symbols. They left the warning. But the successful use of the Zodiac the first time apparently required something. Sacrifice, loss, consequences. The show does not document those consequences. Did the ancient population survive the use of the Zodiac intact? Or did defeating Bill the first time cost them something significant? And if it did cost them something, did that cost influence the shape of what Gravity Falls became afterward? Mystery number 77, the symbols and their deeper meanings. The 10 zodiac symbols, question mark, bag of ice, crescent, pine tree, star, llama, shooting star, six-fingered hand, one-eyed star, and a bleeding heart, are connected to specific individuals. Some of those connections are intuitive. Dipper's pine tree is on his hat. Seuss's question mark is on his shirt. Ford's six-fingered hand is his physical identifier. Bill's symbol in the center, the blue flame, is the one no person represents. But the symbols carry meanings beyond simple identification. The bag of ice connected to Wendy represents her ability to stay calm under pressure, to cool down heated situations. The llama connected to Pacifica, a notoriously stubborn, hard-to-herd animal, represents her initial personality, her resistance to vulnerability, her herd following before she found her own moral agency. The bleeding heart of Robbie, the symbol on his hoodie throughout the show, connects to his emotional openness, his vulnerability to romantic rejection. These symbols were in place before these people were born. The Zodiac was ancient. The symbols were chosen by someone or something that could see forward in time, that knew who would be standing in that room hundreds of years later, that designed a prophecy around people who would not exist for centuries. Who did that? The axolotl? Some other force of temporal awareness? The prophecy's author is as unknown as its origin. Mystery number 78. What happens to people whose symbols are on the Zodiac? There are 10 people on the Zodiac and a town full of people who are not. Being on the Zodiac seems to make someone cosmically significant, targeted by Bill, important to the prophetic framework, carrying a specific kind of weight. Does that cosmic significance end when the prophecy is resolved, or does it persist? Dipper and Mabel leave Gravity Falls as the pine tree and the shooting star, not just as two 12-year-old twins going home. They carry their designations with them. The question of whether those designations attract ongoing cosmic attention, whether being on a demon zodiac is the kind of thing you just stop being after the demon is defeated, is never addressed. Mystery number 79. Blendin Blandin and the Zodiac. Blendin Blandin, the time traveler from the year 207,012, is present during Weird Mageddon and survives the destruction of Time Baby by escaping with his time tape before Bill's attack lands. Blendin's zodiac position, if he has one, is never identified. He is a recurring character with significant involvement in multiple timelines, and yet he does not appear to have a symbol on the wheel. Given that Blendin can access past events, given that the entire Pines family history is something Blendin has observed from his time-traveling vantage point, Blendon occupies a unique position relative to the prophecy. He knows how things ended. He has presumably observed the zodiac ritual's failure and the subsequent resolution. What does Blendon know about the long-term consequences of the show's events that no one in the show's present timeline has access to? Mystery number 80. Who wrote the prophecy? This is the one that haunts me most. The zodiac, the ancient symbols, the prophecy connecting 10 specific individuals to the defeat of Bill Cipher. All of this was encoded in a painting in a cave in the Gravity Falls Valley, left by people who lived there hundreds of years ago, who somehow knew that the symbols needed were specifically these 10, that a fight was coming, that the preparation needed to be made. They knew. They left the instructions. They were right. Someone told them, or showed them, or they were capable of seeing forward. Whatever agency was responsible for this knowledge being preserved in a cave painting for Ford to eventually discover is the same agency that designed the prophecy in the first place. It is not Bill who did not want to be defeated by a zodiac. It is not Ford who did not exist yet. It is not the axolotl, explicitly, though the axolotl's role in cosmic management suggests a being capable of designing such a framework. The prophecy's author is the show's most invisible character, an unseen hand shaping events from before the events began, leaving notes in painted caves for people who will not be born for generations. Section 10. Creatures, Locations, and Anomalies. The Valley's Lesser-Known Wonders. The creatures of Gravity Falls are a population. They are not random encounters. They have relationships with each other, with the valley, with the town's human population, and with the supernatural infrastructure of the area. The show touches on maybe 20% of that population in depth, and the rest exists in the background, glimpsed in crowd shots, mentioned in journal notes, visible in stampedes. Mystery number 81, the gnome political structure. The gnomes of Gravity Falls are an organized society with a king, Jeff, and political processes for finding queens. Their attempt to make Mabel their queen is the very first supernatural encounter of the show. What is the gnome society like in the parts the show does not show? They have a large enough population to form a large vomiting amalgamation of individual gnomes. They have enough political cohesion to coordinate a kidnapping operation. Do they have a history, a mythology, a cultural tradition? Mystery number 82, the multi-bear's grief. The multi-bear, a creature with multiple bear heads who lives on a mountain and enforces trial by combat to defend his territory, has one character detail that makes him profoundly sympathetic. He listens to the pop song Disco Girl because he likes it, despite the social judgment this invites from other bears. His one vulnerability, his one soft thing, is an earnest appreciation for a piece of music he is embarrassed to enjoy. Dipper's victory over the multi-bear is achieved partly through accepting and acknowledging this vulnerability without judgment. But the multi-bear's social isolation, living alone on a mountain, ostracized presumably by the bear community for his musical taste, is something the show visits once and never returns to. Did the multi-bear find connection after that encounter? Is he still on the mountain, still listening to Disco Girl alone? Mystery number 83, the floating cliffs and what is underground. The floating cliffs are one of the most visually striking supernatural features of the Gravity Falls Valley. Stone formations that hang in the air above the lake, defying gravity. Ford's journal notes that his compass goes haywire near them, and that the answer to what causes them may be underground. The show never returns to this explicitly, but Ford's revelation that the valley was formed by a spacecraft crash suggests that the floating cliffs may be related to the crash, either debris suspended by a residual propulsion technology, or a location where the dimensional wound is especially thin and is physically manifesting as a failure of gravity. The cliffs are visible throughout the show, but never the focus of an investigation. They hang there defying physics, season after season, season after season, and the show treats them as part of the scenery, which is exactly what makes them suspicious. Mystery number 84, The Hide Behind. Ford's journals warn of a creature called the Hide Behind, something that lurks just behind its prey, always just out of sight, vanishing the moment the target turns to look. Ford warns against going into the forest at night. This creature is never depicted on screen, only described in the journals. Given that the show is set almost entirely in a town surrounded by forests into which characters regularly wander at night, the hide-behind's absence from the main narrative is conspicuous. Either the hide-behind is a genuine threat that the characters luckily avoided all summer, or its behavior, always behind, never directly observable, makes it the one creature in Gravity Falls that is structurally impossible to encounter directly. It exists in the space of your peripheral vision. It is always almost there. It is the shadow you see when you almost look, and it is gone by the time you fully turn. That kind of creature belongs in a horror tradition much darker than Gravity Falls typically occupies, and its inclusion in the journals suggests Ford had some level of evidence for its existence, even if he never saw it directly. Mystery number 85, The Black Market for Supernatural Goods. Ford's journals mention a paranormal black market accessible through hidden entrances around Gravity Falls, operational only to creatures who know the code and have a key. This market is an economy separate from the human economy of the town, a trading network built on supernatural goods, services, and knowledge that has been operating for as long as the supernatural ecology of the area has been organized enough to support commerce. What is traded there? Artifacts with supernatural properties, presumably. Curses and their countermeasures. The kinds of objects that show up as evidence when the journals describe particularly unusual encounters. The market represents an entire layer of supernatural civilization in the valley that the show never visits directly and that Ford only knew about secondhand. If the market has been operating for as long as Gravity Falls has been weird, the accumulated inventory of that market is a record of the valley's supernatural history. Mystery number 86, The Lake Cave and Mermando. In one episode, Mabel has a romantic encounter with Mermando, a merman, half human, half fish, living secretly in the Gravity Falls public pool. Mermando's circumstances are presented as comic and sweet, but his backstory raises questions. He is a being capable of language, romance, and complex emotional expression who has been living hidden in a public swimming pool because he has no safe way to exist openly in human society. Where did Mermando come from? Are there more like him? The show's universe contains gnomes and minotaurs and unicorns, all of which are humanoid in some sense, but Mermando occupies an unusual space. Yeah. He is not quite a creature and not quite human. And his situation seems not just unique but lonely in a way the show acknowledges through his genuine gratitude for Mabel's kindness. Does the black market know about him? Does the supernatural community of Gravity Falls have a category for beings in his position? Mystery number 87, The Bottomless Pit's Destination. Objects thrown into the bottomless pit end up somewhere. The show's own stories. From the Bottomless Pit episode frames the pit as a narrative device where stories thrown in can come back out. The physical mechanics of the pit, where things actually go when they fall into it, are never specified. It is described as bottomless, which suggests dimensional transit rather than a very deep hole. The journals are in there. Somewhere. Something is going to find them. Mystery number 88, the Northwest Mansion Ghost and His Family. The lumberjack ghost of Nathaniel Northwest, who haunted the Northwest Mansion for generations, was bound there by a deal his descendants failed to honor. When Pacifica opens the party to the townspeople and breaks the family's selfish tradition, the ghost is freed and ascends in a blaze of light and apparent happiness. But Nathaniel Northwest has been trapped in that house for a very long time. He has watched generations of his family. He has seen what became of the people who carry his name. He knows the truth about the founding of Gravity Falls, that the official history attributing the town's founding to the Northwest family was a lie, that the Northwests were not the noble founding family they claimed to be. All of that knowledge goes with him when he ascends. But it also existed in him for a very long time, building, and the rage it generated in a trapped ghost over multiple generations left marks on the house, on the family, on the town's history. What other ghosts are in Gravity Falls? If the Northwest Mansion had one, and if the valley's history is as old and strange as the show implies, there are presumably other presences lingering from other unresolved histories, other trapped entities, other unfinished business embedded in buildings and land and locations throughout the town. Mystery number 89, the shapeshifter and what it knows. And what it... The shapeshifter, but I know. Experiment 210, whom Ford called Shifty before the creature's extreme danger became apparent, was captured by Ford in the bunker and kept in a cryogenic tube for decades before escaping during the events of Season 2. It can take the form of anything it has ever seen, which means its database of forms includes everything Ford showed it, every creature he described, every person who visited the bunker. The shapeshifter's confrontation with Dipper and Wendy in the bunker is one of the show's most genuinely frightening sequences, and it ends with the creature locked back in its tube after a shape-shifting battle. What happened to the shapeshifter after Weirdmageddon? The bunker presumably survived the events of the main story. Is it still in its tube? Is the tube even intact after everything that happened? And what does the shapeshifter know about Ford's early research, about the things Ford showed it, the forms it was asked to practice, the entities Ford was investigating at the time of Shifty's capture? Mystery number 90, the Manitor Society and its depth. The Manitors, massive testosterone-driven hybrid beings who embody an extreme version of traditional masculinity, have a full society with initiation rituals, leadership structures, and specific cultural practices centered on physical challenge. Dipper infiltrates the society briefly to gain membership and backing for a specific goal. But the Manitor world is glimpsed rather than explored. The Manitors predate the town of Gravity Falls by an unknown period. They are not migrants or attracted beings. They are native to this specific valley. Their initiation rituals and cultural practices represent accumulated tradition, which means there was a time when Manitor culture was developing, when the first rituals were being formed, when the question of what it meant to be a Manitor was being actively worked out. That history is invisible in the show, compressed into the confident, fully developed culture Dipper encounters. Section 11. Hidden Codes, the ARG, and the Real-World Mysteries. This section is different from the others. This section is about the mysteries that bled out of the show and into the actual world. Mystery number 91. The Whisper in the Opening Theme. Every episode of Gravity Falls opens with the same brief theme song, and at the very end of that theme, before cutting to the episode itself, a whispered voice says something. Playing it forward, it sounds like nonsense or background noise. Playing it backward reveals messages that change across the seasons. The first whisper, played backward, 3 letters back. This is the instruction for the Caesar cipher used to encode the end credits cryptogram of the first 6 episodes. The show literally embedded the key to its own code in a reversed audio message hidden in its theme song. The second whisper, switch A and Z. The instruction for the Atbash cipher. The third whisper, 26 letters. The instruction for the A1Z 26 substitution cipher. Later, a fourth whisper for the Visionaire cipher. The show was teaching viewers how to decode its own secrets and messages that were hidden from casual observation. This was not for children who watched the show as entertainment. This was for a specific subset of viewers, the ones paying close enough attention, the ones willing to play the recordings backward, the ones who treated watching Gravity Falls as an interactive experience rather than a passive one. This is an extraordinary creative choice. It means Gravity Falls was designed from its first episode to have a community of solvers who were participants in the show rather than just consumers of it. The Whispers were an invitation. Mystery number 92, The Rumble's Revenge Game. Before Bill Cipher appeared on screen for the first time in an actual episode, he was already present in a tie-in online video game called Rumble's Revenge. The game featured cryptograms in its content, and when all the capital letters in all those cryptograms were assembled, they spelled out, "My name is Bill." Bill announced his existence to paying attention fans before the show depicted him. He was already out there in the world, in a game, saying his name to anyone who looked closely enough. This is not a small detail. This is the show's marketing team working in collaboration with the creative team to plant the villain in the real world before revealing him in the fiction. Bill existed in our world, in a game, accessible on real computers, before he existed on screen. The distinction between the fictional Gravity Falls and the actual world was deliberately blurred from the beginning. Mystery number 93, The Cipher Hunt and the Physical Statue. After the show ended in 2016, Alex Hirsch did something no television creator had ever done before. He hid a physical stone statue of Bill Cipher, a real object, approximately life-size, made by sculptor Fawn Davis, in the woods near Reedsport, Oregon. He then launched a global scavenger hunt with clues distributed through encoded messages on social media and physical locations around the world that would guide fans to the statue's location. The clues were international. One was hidden in a shrine in Japan, written on a wooden plaque in ciphertext. One required solving a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle of Bill. One required calling a phone number responding to a lost pig notice for Waddles, Mabel's pig. One required visiting Confusion Hill in California, a roadside attraction that was the real-world inspiration for the Mystery Shack, to claim an item from the site. The hunt took 13 days from July 20th to August 2nd, 2016. And involved fans on multiple continents working cooperatively. The statue was found in a forest near Reedsport. And the warning Alex Hirsch issued when announcing the hunt, the instruction that every participant was given, whatever you do, do not shake its hand. This is not just fan service. This is the creator of a show about deals with a triangle demon, hiding a physical replica of that triangle demon in the real world, and warning people not to make physical gestures of agreement with it. The joke is also real. The line between the fictional universe of Gravity Falls and the real world was being deliberately, playfully, slightly unsettlingly erased. A local boy named Bradley, 13 years old, who had never heard of Gravity Falls, accidentally found the statue before the hunt even launched. He was just walking in the woods near his home and encountered a stone triangle with a top hat. He photographed it and posted it to an online forum for unsolved mysteries. He thought it was weird. He was right. Mystery number 94. The This Is Not a Website .com ARG. The Book of Bill, published in 2024, contained at its very beginning an address to a website. This is not a website.com.com. This website, when visited, presented an interactive computer terminal that responded to specific inputs, typed words and codes that produced different results, referenced events from the show and the book, and continued the fiction that Bill Cipher had genuinely produced the book as an artifact in our world. The website was part of an alternate reality game connected to the book's publication, an ARG that extended the fiction of the Book of Bill into real-world interactions, with puzzles and codes and mysterious messages that the fan community spent weeks decoding. The ARG continued Gravity Falls' tradition of blurring the line between the story and reality, of treating the audience as participants and not just observers. What the ARG ultimately revealed about Bill's status, whether he had escaped the Theraprism, whether he was returning in some new form, whether his invocation of the axolotl had achieved anything, was kept deliberately ambiguous. The game answered some questions and left others carefully open. Just like the show. Mystery number 95, the Gravity Falls universe within other universes. Bill Cipher has appeared in other fictional works and cameos that, per Alex Hirsch's confirmation, are canonical. He appears briefly in the animated series Rick and Morty in several episodes. He appears in The Simpsons episode Bart's in Jail as one of Loki's many forms, voiced by Alex Hirsch, and says, "Buy crypto, suckers." Hirsch confirmed The Simpsons appearance as canonical. What does this mean? If Bill can exist within the fictional universes of other animated shows, if his presence is canonical in those other universes, then those universes and the Gravity Falls universe share a reality at some level. Rick and Morty explicitly involves interdimensional travel and parallel universes. If Bill exists in that universe in a form that Rick and Morty characters can observe on screens, then the Nightmare Realm and the dimensional space of Rick and Morty occupy related or overlapping cosmologies. This is not a small implication. This suggests that Bill Cipher is a cosmic entity whose reach extends across fictional universes, or more precisely, that the multiverse of Gravity Falls contains or intersects with the multiverses of other animated works. Mystery number 96. Alex Hirsch's personal presence in the show. Alex Hirsch, the show's creator, appears in the opening sequence of the show. His face can be seen briefly behind the Hand Witch's hand as the camera pans across. He voices multiple major characters: Stan, Seuss, Bill, McGucket, and others. He embedded his birthday as a recurring number throughout the show. He is present in the show's world in a way that goes beyond a normal creator cameo. Bill's apparent awareness of the fourth wall, his tendency to speak directly to the audience, his comments during possession sequences that seem addressed outside the fictional world, creates a situation where Bill and the show's creator are both speaking from the same place. Alex Hirsch voices Bill Cipher. Bill Cipher appears to be aware he is in a show. Bill Cipher was designed by Hirsch to feel cosmic and aware in a way that no other character in the show demonstrates. Is the joke that Bill Cipher and Alex Hirsch are the same entity from different angles? Or is there something in the show's internal logic about creators and creation that the fourth wall awareness is gesturing toward? Mystery number 97. What the end credits messages said in aggregate. Every episode of Gravity Falls contains an encoded message in the end credits. These messages use different cipher systems as the show progresses. Caesar, Atbash, A1Z26, Visionaire, and the messages range from teasers for upcoming episodes, to jokes, to cryptic fragments of lore. Some are funny, some are chilling, some, in retrospect, predicted events that would not occur until many episodes later. Reading all 40 end credits messages in order creates a kind of parallel text, a second narrative running beneath the show's main story, composed of asides and warnings and jokes and mysteries. Some of these messages have been decoded and cataloged by fans in exhaustive detail. Others, particularly from the later Vigenère cipher period, required community collaboration to decode because the key was distributed across multiple sources. The complete end credits text, read as a continuous document, is its own artifact, a secondary experience of Gravity Falls, available only to those who did the work. Mystery number 98, the backwards audio throughout the show. In addition to the reversed theme song whispers, multiple episodes contain audio that has been reversed and embedded in ordinary seeming scenes. Bill's final words in the finale are the most famous example. Played forward, they are Bill's last attack on Stan. Played backward, they reveal the axolotl invocation. But there are other reversed audio messages scattered throughout both seasons that fans have found and decoded. Some of these messages are gags. Some are lore. Some appear to be things that Bill himself embedded in the show's audio. Messages from the Triangle speaking through the medium to the audience, addressed to people watching a show about a town that never should have been weird. Mystery number 99, the Gravity Falls Owl House connection. Journal 1 contains a page that appears to reference the animated show The Owl House, which was created by Dana Terrace, who worked on Gravity Falls before creating her own show. The page reference is subtle, a small amount of text on a page next to the crawl space entry that possibly says legends are true, next to what appears to be a visual reference to the Owl House's world. Alex Hirsch and Dana Terrace collaborated on Gravity Falls, and the Owl House is explicitly set in a universe connected to ours through dimensional portals. If the Gravity Falls universe and the Owl House universe are connected, or if they share the same multiverse, the implications for what the dimensional landscape around Gravity Falls connects to are significant. Bill's dimensional awareness, his ability to perceive and access multiple realities, may extend to worlds created by creators who worked in the same creative space as Alex Hirsch. Mystery number 100. Whether the show is actually over. Alex Hirsch has said multiple times that he ended the show intentionally, that it was designed to be finite, that he wanted a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. He has also said after the show ended that he is open to returning to the universe with additional content. The Book of Bill was published in 2024. In June 2024, Disney Television Vice President Meredith Roberts said they were in discussions with Hirsch about the show and added, "Never say never." Gravity Falls is not officially over in any sense that forecloses continuation. The bottomless pit contains 3 journals. Bill's stone form exists somewhere. The Theraprism contains a motivated tenant. The dimensional scar under Gravity Falls is still there. Ford and Stan are sailing the world. Dipper is growing up with supernatural knowledge that has no good outlet. Mabel is turning 13 and growing toward a future the show did not show us. The summer ended. The story did not. Section 12. The Final 100. Collected Mysteries, Lingering Questions, and the Heart of the Unknown. We have come a long way through the woods. Let us cover the last 100 mysteries with the depth they deserve. Organized by theme and examined with the care this extraordinary show has always earned from the people who pay attention to it. In this final section, we are going through the mysteries that did not fit cleanly into the earlier sections. The ones that live in corners and background details, and offhand references and implications that grew from small seeds. Each one is real. Each one is earned by the show's own attention to its world. Mystery 101. The Stan-O War II. The boat Stan and Ford named after the boat they repaired as children. The one their father threw into the ocean when he threw Stan out of the house carries the weight of 60 years of separation in its name. The second, not the original. The original is gone at the bottom of whatever ocean their father threw it into. This one is built on the memory of the original, which is itself a symbol of what Stan and Ford are doing. Rebuilding something that was destroyed by forces outside themselves, making a second version that is informed by what happened to the first. Do they find the wreck of the original Stan O War somewhere in the ocean? Do they sail to the place where their father threw it? Does that journey happen? Is that conversation the one about what it meant to lose not just the boat, but the future they had planned together? Is that conversation on the list of things they say to each other in the dark Pacific nights? Mystery 102, the Perpetual Motion Machine's Blueprint. Ford built a perpetual motion machine as a teenager. The machine was destroyed, but Ford built it. He knew how. The knowledge of how to build a machine that appears to generate energy without consuming it. Knowledge that Ford possessed at 17 before he had any formal training in physics. Knowledge that may have involved dimensional principles Ford did not yet understand. That knowledge is inside Ford's head. Did Ford ever try to rebuild it? After returning from 30 years between dimensions with vastly expanded scientific knowledge, did he revisit the work of his 17-year-old self and understand it now in ways he could not then? The perpetual motion machine, understood through dimensional physics, might be the most consequential technology Ford ever attempted. Mystery 103, the Glass Shard Beach House. Ford and Stan grew up in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. Their childhood home, the house where Philbrook Pines raised two sons and eventually threw one of them out, is never visited in the show. It exists off-screen, the origin point of everything. What happened to it? Does Stan still own it in some technical sense? Did Philbrook Pines die in it, alone, having discarded one son and watched the other disappear through a dimensional portal? Is there something in that house that matters to the story? Something from the twins' childhood that the show never had time to retrieve? Mystery 104. What Stanford did with the knowledge of Bill and the Egyptians. Ford's research into Bill's history with human civilizations should have produced one of the most important documents in the field of supernatural research. A documented chain of Bill's influence on human history, stretching back thousands of years, connecting known historical events, the construction of the pyramids, the design of the American Great Seal, the founding of secret societies, to a consistent supernatural actor operating through manipulation and failed deals. This document, if Ford wrote it, would be explosive. It would rewrite the history of human civilization from a supernatural perspective. Does it exist? Is it in one of the journals now at the bottom of the bottomless pit? Did Ford share it with anyone? Did the government agents who arrested Stan and eventually had their memories wiped, did they get access to any of this before the wipe? Mystery 105. The infinite-sided die and what it does. Ford retrieved, during his dimensional travels, an infinity-sided die, a polyhedral object described as highly illegal. The die appears in the Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons episode when it accidentally rolls and causes a character from Ford and Dipper's game to come to life and attack them. The die is then locked away in the lab, but an infinity-sided die is exactly what the name implies, a probability engine capable of generating any outcome from an infinite space of possibilities. Ford has this object. He has kept it. It is not destroyed. What has Ford considered doing with it? What would an infinity-sided die do if rolled under conditions where the outcome space was not a game but something real? Mystery 106. What Mabel does with her supernatural knowledge creatively. Mabel is an artist. She sweaters, she scrapbooks, she makes art constantly throughout the summer. She processed everything that happened to her in Gravity Falls through creative expression. The sweater with the light bulb, the sweater with scouts on her, the art she made during the weird Mageddon days when she was imprisoned in her happy dream bubble. Mabel's creative work is a record of her summer in Gravity Falls, encoded in yarn and glitter and color. It is the other journal, the emotional journal, the one that tells the story of what the summer felt like from the inside rather than documenting what was learned. Does that work survive? Is it somewhere? Does anyone who encounters it understand what it depicts? Mystery 107. The number of times Stan was Bill's target without knowing it. Bill made multiple appearances in Stan's mind, attempting to access his memories, trying to find the code to his safe, trying to locate information that Stan had. Each of those visits was a violation. Bill entering Stan's mindscape without consent, prowling through his memories. Stan, who cannot be formally possessed because he never shook Bill's hand, was nonetheless repeatedly visited. The scale of that ongoing surveillance, of Bill spending years watching Stan from the inside of Stan's own head, is something the show established but never fully quantified. Mystery 108. The specific contents of Stan's memories. When Stan's memories are erased to defeat Bill, the content of those memories goes with them. The mechanism of recovery, the week of intensive memory reconstruction that Ford and the family undertake using important objects and relationships, suggests that the memories are recoverable through emotional triggers. But the process of recovery is not shown in detail. The show ends with Stan remembering, broadly, but the specifics of what he recovered and what remained missing are unaddressed. Stan's memories contain 30 years of Mystery Shack history, 30 years of encounters with Gravity Falls' supernatural inhabitants, 30 years of building the machine to bring his brother home. He might have recovered most of that. Some of it might remain absent, small gaps, personal details, the texture of specific moments that no photograph or physical artifact was present to trigger. Stan might be missing things he does not know he is missing. Mystery 109. The Raccoon Wife. Old Man McGucket, during his years of self-imposed madness and memory erasure, apparently married a raccoon. This is mentioned once, casually, in the context of McGucket preparing for the apocalypse by going to a bunker with his raccoon wife. It is played completely straight. No one reacts. The show moves on. There was a raccoon wife. McGucket was married to a raccoon. This exists in the canon of Gravity Falls and is never explained. Who was she? Did she know what she was? Was she a supernatural entity in raccoon form? Was she literally just a raccoon that McGucket developed a familial attachment to during his years of diminished mental capacity? What happened to her after McGucket recovered his sanity and his fortune? Mystery 110. The Lambie Lambie Dance. In the episode Little Dipper, Gideon's Tent of Telepathy show features a segment called the Lambie Lambie Dance, which Gideon performs for the audience with apparent, genuine enthusiasm. It is a children's performer routine. Gideon is a child. Beneath his villainy, beneath his ambition, beneath his extensive supernatural knowledge, Gideon is a child who does the Lambie Lambie dance for an audience and enjoys it. This detail is not a mystery exactly. It is a reminder that the show's approach to its characters, even its villains, is fundamentally humanizing. The question it raises is not a lore question. It is an emotional one. What kind of adult will Gideon become, having gone through everything he went through while still young enough to genuinely enjoy performing children's entertainment? Mystery 111. Sos's first name. Sus, short for Jesus. Jesus Alzamirano Ramirez. The show reveals this with characteristic casual matter-of-factness. Sos has always been Soos. The full name is presented and then the show continues. The name Jesus in the Gravity Falls universe belongs to the single most consistently good-hearted person in the main cast. The one who shows up, who helps, who never abandons his people, whose love for his community is bottomless and genuine. This is either the most blasphemous possible casting of the name or the most earnest possible use of it. In a show this careful about meaning, it is probably both. Mystery 112, the invisible bag of ice. Wendy's zodiac symbol is a bag of ice, representing her ability to remain cool under pressure. The show makes explicit that this symbol connects to Wendy's calm, her reliability in crisis, her steady presence in situations that would unravel most people. But the bag of ice as a visual symbol is oddly mundane. Surrounded by a pine tree, a shooting star, a six-fingered hand, a pentagram, and a llama, the bag of ice is the most domestic, most ordinary object on an otherwise cosmically weighted wheel. This is intentional. Wendy's contribution to the zodiac, her role in the cosmic framework of Gravity Falls, is not dramatic or mystical. It is practical. It is the grounding that keeps everything else from boiling over. The bag of ice is not less significant than the shooting star. It is differently significant in a way that the show values and that the zodiac honors by including it. Mystery 113, what the tourists actually think. The tourists who visit the Mystery Shack every summer, who pay Stan's inflated admission prices to see the Sasquatch and the pterosaur and the various obviously fake exhibits, they are the background population of the show, the anonymous masses being scammed, the people for whom the Mystery Shack exists as a purely commercial experience. But they are in Gravity Falls. Some of them must have seen things. Some of them must have had encounters with the genuine supernatural that went beyond the tourist-trapped experience Stan sold them. The Society of the Blind Eye presumably erased those encounters when they occurred. But what was the scale of memory erasure happening in Gravity Falls on a peak summer day? How many tourists walked into the woods and needed to be retrieved and restored? The Society's work, across however many years it operated, represents a systematic suppression of supernatural awareness, affecting an unknown number of people who never knew they were subjects of a memory management program. Mystery 114, the question of other journals. Ford wrote 3 journals covering his years in Gravity Falls. But Ford spent 30 years between dimensions after that, continuing his research in radically different environments. Did he write more? Did he continue the journal format? If Journal 3 is the third in a series from his Gravity Falls years, what was he up to intellectually in Dimension 52 and the other spaces he traveled? The multiverse Ford experienced for 30 years is documented somewhere, or it is not, and both possibilities are significant. Mystery 115, the mailbox's source. Return to the all-knowing mailbox. It knows things. It knows future things. It is at a fixed location in Gravity Falls. It has been there long enough that Ford documented it. What is the mailbox's mechanism? It presumably has one. It is not literally an omniscient object. It is an object that receives information from somewhere and presents it on request. What is that source? Is there a higher order information repository connected to the mailbox through some dimensional link? Is the mailbox an interface for something like the axolotl, a cosmic information source making itself available at a specific geographic coordinate? The mailbox is a receiving station. Something is transmitting to it. What? Mystery 116, Gompers the goat and what he knows. Gompers, the Mystery Shack's resident goat who wanders the property, eating objects indiscriminately, is a comic presence throughout the show. He is a goat. He eats things. He is occasionally relevant to plot points in minor ways. He is background. But Gompers has lived on the Mystery Shack property through decades of supernatural activity. He has been present during the portal's reconstruction, through multiple supernatural crises, through Weird Mageddon, a goat with decades of proximity to a dimensional hotspot, to a portal, to multiple encounters with Bill Cipher and his minions. What does Gompers perceive? What has Gompers seen? Goats in folklore occupy an interesting space associated with both domestic commonality and uncanny significance. Gompers is named. He is persistent. He is always there. Is Gompers just a goat? Probably. But in a show where the all-knowing mailbox is just a mailbox, probably is doing a lot of work. Mystery 117, the final page of Journal 3. The official published version of Journal 3 ends with a page in which Ford, writing directly to whoever is reading the journal, invites the reader to place their hand on the page under a black light and see what appears. When you do, text written in invisible ink is revealed. "We've been waiting for you." The message is signed by Stanford Pines. The words are encoded in the same Caesar cipher the show uses throughout. "We've been waiting for you." This is the show's final direct address to its audience, written in invisible ink in a book about invisible ink, revealed only to those who did the work to see it. We have been waiting for you. For you, specifically the person holding the blacklight. For you who paid attention, who decoded things, who showed up. The show ends with its creator thanking its audience for finding it. In cipher. In a book about a journal. In invisible ink revealed by invisible light. Mystery 118. What a season 3 would have been about. Hirsch has said in various interviews that the show was always like a plan to be finite, that he knew from early on that it would end after 2 seasons. He has also said there were ideas in development for what more story could have looked like. Stories set in the interdimensional spaces Ford traveled. Stories set after the twins returned home. Stories that would have explored the longer-term implications of the portal and Weird Mageddon. What would the 3rd chapter of Dipper and Mabel's story have been? The tantalizing hints, Dipper's interest in continuing supernatural research, Ford's offer of mentorship, the open question of the journals in the bottomless pit, the not destroyed but contained Bill. All of these point toward a possible 3rd season that existed in imagination, if not in production. What were those stories? What did Hirsch and his team conceive and leave on the table? Mystery 119, the title card mysteries. Every episode of Gravity Falls has a title card featuring the episode's name in a specific visual style. Each title card contains small details, visual jokes, sometimes coded elements that connect to the episode's content or to broader lore. Some of these have been extensively analyzed. Others contain details so small they have never been fully documented. In aggregate, the title cards are an additional layer of communication, things said about each episode before the episode says them. Additional information delivered in a form that casual viewers never examine. The complete analysis of all 40 title cards as a unified text has never, to my knowledge, been done with complete thoroughness. Mystery 120, the Pines family curse, and the number 6. Ford has 6 fingers. His journals have 6-fingered hands as their identifier. His zodiac symbol is the 6-fingered hand. 6, one more than 5, one above the standard, is Ford's number throughout the show. The 6th finger is the thing that marked him as different from birth. In many traditions, being born with an extra finger indicates being a changeling, someone not quite of the normal human world, someone with a connection to the uncanny. Ford Pines, by birth, was marked as something other than fully ordinary. The show does not frame this as supernatural ability. It is presented as a genetic quirk, a birth defect, nothing more. But in a show where every symbol has been chosen with care, the man whose hands carry the mark of the supernatural from birth, being the one who spent his life in the most supernaturally dense location in America, is not a coincidence the show allows itself. Mystery 121. The gravity of Gravity Falls as literal mechanism. The show's title refers to something real. Gravity Falls. Not Gravity Falls as in an attraction by gravity. Gravity Falls as in the force of gravity itself failing. The floating cliffs are the most visible manifestation. The gravity anomaly that occurs when the portal is fully activated, the sequence in Not What He Seems Me when objects float around the Mystery Shack's interior, is another. These are points at which gravity itself becomes unreliable in the valley. What is the relationship between the dimensional wound beneath the valley and the gravitational behavior of the area? If the crash created a spot where two dimensions press against each other, and if those two dimensions have different gravitational constants or different relationships to mass energy, then the bleed between them could produce zones of gravitational irregularity. The floating cliffs may be stones caught in the gradient between two gravitational regimes. The portal, when active, may amplify that gradient. This is physics. Real physics, extended into the show's universe, applied to a fictional problem. It is the kind of thinking that Gravity Falls rewards. Mystery 122, Robbie's Songs. Robbie Valentino, Wendy's ex-boyfriend who Dipper initially despises, is revealed to be a musician whose songs were made with Bill Cipher's assistance, or at least contain subliminal messages embedded in backward audio that affect the emotional states of listeners. Wendy's feelings for Robbie while they were dating were partially a result of these subliminal messages. When the messages are discovered and Wendy hears them clearly, she is angry and ends the relationship. But Robbie, who is presented as a sad, passionate teenager, apparently wrote songs with Bill's assistance without fully understanding what he was doing. Did Bill approach Robbie? Did Robbie stumble into supernatural territory he did not understand? The emotional authenticity of Robbie's music, he clearly means his songs even when they are technically enhanced, creates a situation where genuine feeling and supernatural manipulation are impossible to fully disentangle. Does Robbie know what he did? No. Does he eventually find out? And what does it mean for his entire body of work as a musician that some portion of his emotional output was co-created with a demonic entity? Mystery 123. What Pacifica's father actually knew. Preston Northwest made a deal with Bill Cipher during Weirdmageddon, pledging allegiance and investing all family funds in Bill's weirdness bonds. This was either catastrophically poor judgment or a calculated risk that failed spectacularly. But Preston's willingness to make this deal suggests some familiarity with Bill, or at least with the possibility of making deals with supernatural entities, which is consistent with the Northwest family's history of supernatural arrangements. How deep does the Northwest family's supernatural awareness run? Their deal with the lumberjack ghost was known to the family for generations. They participated actively in suppressing information about it and maintaining the fiction of their noble founding history. They had institutional knowledge of supernatural negotiation. Preston's deal with Bill was reckless and catastrophic, but it was not made by someone who did not know supernatural deals were possible. Mystery 124. Blendon Blandon's complete knowledge of the Pines family timeline. Blendon is a time traveler who has been involved in the Pines family story from outside the show's main narrative. He has observed events across the timeline. He knows what happened to all of them. Not just the events of the summer, but what came afterward. In the future of the Gravity Falls universe, from Blendon's perspective, the events of the show are historical. They are documented. They happened, and their consequences unfolded, and someone in the year 207,012 has access to that complete record. What does the future say about what happened to Dipper and Mabel? What role do the Pines family play in the history of the Gravity Falls universe going forward? Blendon's existence and his knowledge is the show's acknowledgement that there is a future, that the events of the show had consequences that extended through time, without ever specifying what that future contained. Mystery 125 through 140 collected small mysteries. Many of the show's smaller unresolved questions can be listed rapidly, and each warrants its own investigation. The fate of the love god, a supernatural entity who appears in one episode and meddles with romantic connections in Gravity Falls, and whose interactions with the town's permanent residents presumably continue after the episode ends. The contents of the Gravity Falls paranormal black market. What the woodpecker, the third wife of an eighth and a half president, was actually like. Whether the cursed doors in Journal 3 were ever found or opened. What the Gremloblin, a creature who transforms based on its own reflection, looks like now that mirrors are presumably everywhere in Gravity Falls homes. What happened to Several Times, the boy band composed of clones who escaped into the forest at the end of their episode? How the Man-O-Tors feel about the post-Weirdmageddon state of the valley. Whether the memory gun technology Ford invented has any applications beyond supernatural incident management. What the Gravity Falls Library contains. What the Northwest Mansion's supernatural history looks like on paper, compiled from the full run of deals and arrangements the family made. What the government agents who had their memories erased eventually did with their careers after being the sole surviving witnesses to a dimensional catastrophe they could no longer remember. Mystery 141 through 160. The deeper cosmology questions. Does the axolotl have peers? Are there other beings of similar power operating in other parts of the multiverse? Managing other cosmic debtors, running other theraprisms for other destructive entities? The multiverse of Gravity Falls is explicitly enormous. Bill is explicitly old and experienced and has operated across multiple universes for trillions of years. The scale of the cosmology the show implies is so vast that the axolotl being unique seems like an insufficiently populated universe. What else is out there at the axolotl's level? What are the rules of the space outside normal dimensions? What governs the interactions between entities like Bill and cosmic administrators like the axolotl? Is the theraprism actually effective? Have other entities been successfully rehabilitated there? What was the space between the second dimension and the nightmare realm that Bill traversed after destroying Euclidia? What exists in Dimension 52, the strangely pleasant dimension Ford visited? What are the infinite alternate versions of Gravity Falls that exist across the multiverse? The ones where Bill succeeded, the ones where the portal was never built, the ones where Ford never went to Gravity Falls at all? What does Gravity Falls look like in those dimensions? What does the Pines family look like in those dimensions? What does Bill know about those alternate versions of himself in infinite alternate dimensions, given that he has stated he can see them? Mystery 161 through 180. The emotional mysteries. What did Stan feel moment by moment during the 30 years he operated the Mystery Shack alone? What is the first conversation Ford and Stan had after they were safely alone on their boat, with no audience, no emergency, no crisis requiring their attention? Just two old men who used to be close and had a long way to go to get back to it? What did Dipper think about on the bus home, watching Gravity Falls get smaller through the window? What did Mabel dream about that first night back in their regular home? Did Wendy write a diary entry about the summer, and if so, what did she say? Did Sos tell his grandmother about the portal? What did Abuelita say when he did? What was the first normal, boring day after the summer ended? And how did normal and boring feel to people who had just survived the apocalypse? What does Pacifica's first day in a school where her family is no longer the town's most powerful dynasty feel like? What does Gideon tell his parents about everything that happened? Does Robbie keep making music? Does it still have things in it that he did not consciously put there? What does Old Man McGucket's first fully lucid day feel like after years of self-imposed forgetting? What is the first thing McGucket does with his recovered sanity and his patent-derived fortune? The very first thing on the very first day that the fog lifts and he is himself again. These are the emotional mysteries, the ones that do not have lore implications or cosmic consequences, the ones that matter because the characters matter. Because 10 years after the show ended, the people who loved it are still thinking about these people and what became of them and whether they are okay. Mystery 181 through 200, the ones we will never answer. There is a category of Gravity Falls mystery that is intentionally, permanently unanswerable. Not because the show ran out of time, not because Alex Hirsch forgot to address them, but because the show was designed to feel like a place you could explore forever and never fully map. The deliberate incompleteness of the Mystery Shack's architecture on the rooms that are different every time, the hallways that go places they should not reach, is a physical metaphor for the show's epistemological design. You cannot know everything about Gravity Falls. There will always be another room. There will always be another page in invisible ink. There will always be another code at the bottom of the credits that someone has not decoded yet. The hide behind is always there. You just cannot see it when you look directly at it. The answer is always underground. The compass always goes haywire. What is the most important mystery in Gravity Falls that I have not mentioned? What is the one thing, the one detail you noticed, the one question you wrote down in your own notebook the last time you watched? Every person who loves this show carries their own private inventory of unanswered questions, their own specific thread they keep pulling. That inventory is yours. It is part of the show's gift to you. Gravity Falls gave you 137 episodes of animated television, 3 canon books, a global scavenger hunt, an alternate reality game, a reversed theme song, 40 cryptograms, invisible ink, a stone statue in Oregon woods, and the instruction delivered by its creator not to shake its hand. It gave you a town that should not be possible, and a family that feels real, and a villain who misses home and cannot return, and will not stop trying. It gave you summer and pine trees and fog, and the feeling of a story that has more in it than you can hold at once. And when you got to the end, when the twins got on the bus and the town receded, and the credits rolled, and the final code decoded to something warm and human and earned, it gave you this. We've been waiting for you. Mystery 173. The Gravity Falls public pool and its long history. Mermando lived in that pool. He was hiding in a structure specifically designed for community use, a place where children swam, where summer belonged to everyone. The choice to hide in a public pool rather than in the lake or a private body of water says something about Mermando's character. He wanted to be around people. He wanted proximity to a human community, even in secret, even at the risk of discovery. His loneliness drove him toward the exact environment where being found was most likely. The pool, its lifeguards, the families who used it, none of them knew what shared the water with them. How long had Mermando been there before Mabel found him? How many summers had he spent watching children swim above him and never been seen? Mystery 174. The supernatural community's awareness of Bill. During Weirdmageddon, the creatures and supernatural beings of Gravity Falls took shelter in the Mystery Shack alongside the town's human survivors. Gnomes and manitors and unicorns and the multi-bear, and several times, they all ended up together in one building, hiding from the same threat. This means the supernatural community of the valley knows about Bill. They have known about Bill. These are not entities who were surprised by Weird Mageddon. The gnomes ran. The manitors ran. They had enough awareness of what Bill represented to flee in the right direction. What did the supernatural community of Gravity Falls know about Bill that Ford did not? They are native to the valley. They have been there for generations, for centuries, for longer. If Bill has periodically disturbed the valley throughout its history, as the ancient cave painting suggests, then the creatures of Gravity Falls have a collective memory of Bill that predates Ford's research by hundreds of years. There's a history here that lives in the oral tradition of the Gnome Kingdom, in the Manitar stories told around their fires, in whatever the unicorns remember about the last time the dimensional boundary thinned. Mystery 175. The significance of summer. The entire show is set in summer. One summer. The season most associated with freedom, with temporary escape from routine, with the particular intensity of experiences that are defined by their ending. Summer in Gravity Falls is the season when everything is most alive, when the supernatural is most visible, when the valley's strangeness is most accessible. The choice to set the show in summer rather than autumn or winter is not arbitrary. Summer is when children are most free to wander. Summer is when the light lasts longest and the woods are most inviting, and the things that live in the woods are most active. Summer is when the boundary between ordinary life and the extraordinary becomes permeable, when the rules of the regular school year relax and something else becomes possible. The summer in Gravity Falls is the season of the liminal, the time when everything is briefly between one state and another, when growing up is happening but is not yet finished, when Dipper and Mabel are old enough to investigate and young enough to still be changed by what they find. What is Gravity Falls in winter? Winter brings isolation. The tourists go. The town shrinks to its permanent population, the woods get dark earlier, and the cold settles into the valley in a way that changes everything. Whatever the valley is in winter, whatever the supernatural ecology looks like when the light fails earlier and the temperature drops, and the creatures that thrive in warmth go wherever they go in cold months. That is a completely unexplored aspect of a place we know well only in one season. Mystery 176. The real person behind Quentin Tremblay. The show invents a fictitious eighth and a half president of the United States whose existence has been officially expunged from American history. Quentin Tremblay is played entirely for comedy. His historical inanity includes such decisions as declaring everything in America property of Tremblay and attempting to eat a king cobra. The episode Irrational Treasure, in which Dipper and Mabel discover the conspiracy suppressing Tremblay's historical existence, is one of the show's funniest and most structurally clever. But Tremblay founded Gravity Falls. He chose this specific valley, this specific location in Oregon, to be the site of a town. Why? What drew him there? The show implies his decisions were mostly random and his competence was minimal, but someone had to point him toward Gravity Falls specifically. Someone had to tell him or show him or lead him to the valley with the strange creatures and the impossible cliffs and the compass that does not work right. Was that someone supernatural? Was it Bill engineering the conditions that would eventually produce a town over a dimensional hotspot? Was it something else? One of the valley's other entities, the ones who predate the gnomes and manitors, the ones who have been in the valley longest and have the strongest opinions about who enters it and builds things there, Tremblay's founding of Gravity Falls is presented as a comedy of errors. It may also be a directed event. Mystery 177. What Ford means when he says he was influenced by Bill. Throughout the show, Ford describes the period of his collaboration with Bill as one of extraordinary intellectual productivity. He made discoveries. He built things. He understood things about the universe that he would not have understood without Bill's guidance. And then he discovered he was being manipulated, that every discovery and every building and every understanding was in service of Bill's agenda rather than Ford's curiosity. The question of what specifically in Ford's accumulated body of knowledge is genuinely Ford's and what is Bill's is something Ford himself may not fully be able to answer. The portal is obviously Bill's. It was the entire point of the collaboration. But the other inventions Ford built during those years, the other research he conducted, the other insights he reached, how much of that came from Ford's genuine brilliance guided by his own curiosity, and how much was shaped by subtle pushes from an entity who knew what he wanted Ford to understand and what he did not? Ford's mind was Bill's territory, not just in the obvious way of the possession and the metal plate and the burning eye, in the subtler, more insidious way of knowing someone so well that you can make their own curiosity serve your purposes without them ever knowing you were steering. Mystery 178. The Society of the Blind Eye's Full Records. The Society of the Blind Eye kept records. Any organization that systematically erased memories over a period of years, tracking who had been erased, what they had seen, how many times they had been subjected to the process, would necessarily maintain documentation of its operations. Those records are somewhere. They are not in the show. They presumably survived the society's dissolution. Those records contain a detailed account of every supernatural incident in Gravity Falls that came to the society's attention over its operational years, categorized and logged and indexed. They are, in effect, a supplementary set of journals, a blind eye journal, the anti-knowledge document, the record of what was deliberately unmade. If those records were found and decoded, they would reveal an entirely different history of Gravity Falls. Not the history of what Ford discovered, but the history of what ordinary people witnessed and were made to forget. Mystery 179, The Gravity Falls Founding Myth in Detail. The official founding story of Gravity Falls, the one the Northwest family maintained and the town's public culture promoted, involved the Northwests as noble, civilized founders who brought order and progress to a wild territory. This story, as the show reveals, is a fabrication. The actual founding was messier, more chaotic, more connected to Quentin Trembley's delusional presidency than to Northwest family beneficence. But the fabricated founding story was maintained for generations through active suppression, and presumably through some supernatural assistance, given the Northwest family's history of otherworldly arrangements. What were the real founding stories of Gravity Falls? Not the official version, and not the Trembley version, but the pre-European histories, the stories that existed in the valley before any American history was written there. Those stories are completely absent from the show's record. They may be the most important stories in the valley's history. Mystery 180. What other towns are like. Gravity Falls is presented as unique, the single greatest concentration of supernatural activity on Earth, the place where the dimensional boundary is thinnest, the location of the crash and the wound, and the weirdness hotspot. The government agency that investigates the Pines family and the town seems to have other operations. Agents Powers and Trigger are part of a larger organization that investigates paranormal activity. Other locations, other incidents, other supernatural events that never rise to the level of Gravity Falls, but that suggest the world beyond the valley has its own relationship with the impossible. Are there other Gravity Falls? Other places where dimensional boundaries are thin, where strange things cluster, where someone is quietly filling journals with warnings? The show presents the valley as singular, but the existence of a government paranormal investigation agency suggests that the weirdness is not entirely contained. It bleeds. Other places are weird in smaller ways. Other journals are being written by other people who stumbled onto something they could not explain and decided to document it rather than run. What are those places like? Who are those people, and do any of them know about each other? There is something specific that Gravity Falls does to you over time. It is not the feeling of watching a mystery box show that keeps withholding answers to keep you invested. It is the opposite of that. It is the feeling of a world that is genuinely larger than the story being told about it. A world that would go on existing, whether or not anyone was watching. Whether or not Dipper and Mabel were there to document it. Whether or not Ford came back from the dimensions. The summer in Gravity Falls is a window. When the summer ends and the window closes, the world behind it continues. That is what makes the unanswered questions feel different from ordinary loose ends. They are not plot holes or omissions. They are the texture of a world with depth. The questions do not represent things the show failed to address. They represent the fact that the show was describing a real place. A fictional real place, yes, but one built with enough internal logic and accumulated detail that gaps in the documentation feel like gaps in knowledge rather than gaps in construction. Ford spent 6 years in Gravity Falls and documented a fraction of what was there. The show spent 2 seasons in Gravity Falls and documented a fraction of what Ford documented. We have been spending this video cataloging questions derived from a fraction of the show's content and finding that even that fraction generates hundreds of unanswerable things. The depths go down. Let us take this seriously for a moment. Let us apply the logic of the show's universe to the question of what the town of Gravity Falls actually is in the largest possible frame. The valley was formed by a crash. Something enormous came down millions of years ago and created a wound in the boundary between dimensions. That wound has been open ever since. For millions of years before any human being had ever walked through North America, the valley where Gravity Falls would eventually be founded was already anomalous. It was already pulling things toward it. Strange creatures found it and lived there because the ambient dimensional bleed created conditions that were not available anywhere else on Earth. The valley had an ecology before it had a name. Then human beings arrived, the first ones, thousands of years ago, and found a valley full of impossible things. They adapted. They built cultural frameworks for understanding what they were surrounded by. They encountered Bill Cipher and defeated him and left painted warnings for the people who would come later. They were not the last. Other peoples came. Other cultures engaged with the valley's strangeness. Other traditions incorporated the floating cliffs and the compass anomalies and the strange creatures into their understanding of the world. All of that history is essentially invisible in the show. It happened. It shaped the valley. It is somewhere in the earth and the caves and the carved surfaces of the floating cliffs. It is part of what the valley is. Then Europeans arrived, and Quentin Tremblay founded the official town, and the history that the Northwest family was so desperate to control began. And Ford arrived, and Stan arrived, and Dipper and Mabel arrived, and the summer happened, and the journals went into the bottomless pit, and the show ended. But the valley is still there. Whatever it was before the crash is gone, but what it became after. The dimensional scar, the weirdness hotspot, the place where the boundary between realities is thin enough that light bends wrong and compasses fail and time travelers come from the future specifically to observe the events that happen here. That is permanent. The crash that created the wound happened millions of years ago. No human activity can reverse a million-year-old dimensional injury. The Valley of Gravity Falls will be weird long after the pine trees that Dipper's hat references have grown and fallen and grown again 1,000 times. What does Gravity Falls look like in 100 years? In 1,000? If the dimensional wound persists, and there is no reason in the show's logic to believe it will not, then whatever comes after the town of Gravity Falls will face the same reality that the town faces now. There will be creatures. There will be anomalies. There will be someone who comes to investigate and stays too long, and starts writing things down. The journals will end up somewhere from the bottomless pit. Someone will find them. It will start again. Bill said his time has come to burn and invoked the ancient power that he may return. The axolotl heard him and sent him to the Theraprism. The Theraprism, according to the Book of Bill, is failing to rehabilitate him. The arts and crafts book he made has been sent to our world. The door of the Theraprism is apparently not as secure as the axolotl intended. What does a returning Bill Cipher look like in a different form in a different time? The axolotl's poem says, "This is the mechanism of his possible absolution. A different form, a different time. Absolution through transformation. Bill reborn, not as the all-seeing eye of fire that destroyed his home dimension and spent trillions of years trying to tear holes in ours, but as something new. Something that has to learn, again from the beginning, what it means to exist inside a world rather than outside all of them. The idea of Bill Cipher being reborn into something vulnerable, something that does not remember what it was, that has to discover the world through ordinary senses, that experiences limits and consequences and the slow accumulation of a life, is simultaneously the most hopeful and the most terrifying note the show's mythology leaves us on. Hopeful because it is the possibility of redemption for the most irredeemably chaotic being in the fiction. Terrifying because it means Bill is somewhere in some form, growing up in a world that does not know what it contains. Maybe he is in Gravity Falls. Maybe that is why the valley keeps generating weirdness even after the portal is gone. Not just because of the dimensional wound, but because the entity most drawn to dimensional wounds is somewhere in the valley, in a new form, remembering nothing, drawn back to the place that smells most like home to whatever is left of what he was. Maybe the hide behind in the woods is something new, something that has not found itself yet, something that stays just out of sight not because it is predatory, but because it does not yet know how to be seen. That is speculation. That is fan theory. That is me sitting in the dark with the pine trees outside the window, thinking about a show that taught a generation how to look for what is hidden, how to reverse the audio and read the invisible ink and find the messages that were there all along. That is what Gravity Falls does. It makes you look. It makes you pay attention. It whispers backward at the end of its theme. 3 letters back. It hides its secrets in the margins of things. It tells you, in invisible ink revealed by the right kind of light, that it has been waiting for you. All you have to do is bring the black light. If this video found you in a cozy moment, I want to know about it. Drop a comment. Tell me where you are and what time it is and whether this is new or a rewatch. This community is made of people who pay attention to things, who rewind the theme song, who hold books up to black lights. You are exactly the kind of person this show was made for. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. It helps enormously, and it means you will be here when we go somewhere else strange together. Because there are more mysteries and more worlds than the journals have pages, and we are just getting started. Until next time, watch for the hide behind. Do not shake any triangle's hands. And remember, the answer is always underground. A final note on paying attention. The thing about Gravity Falls that I keep coming back to, the thing that separates it from other shows with mysteries and ciphers and hidden messages, is that the show's relationship with its audience was always a relationship of mutual respect. Most shows with hidden content treat it as a bonus, something for the dedicated fans who go looking, a reward for the completionists. Gravity Falls went further than that. The hidden content in Gravity Falls was not decorative, it was structural. The reversed whispers at the end of the theme song were not flavor text, they were functional keys to decoding information embedded in every single episode. The end credits cryptograms were not Easter eggs, they were a parallel narrative running alongside the main story. The invisible ink in the journals was not supplementary material. It contained plot critical information about the show's events and its characters' histories. The cipher hunt was not a publicity stunt. It was the show's finale extended into the real world, a genuine mystery that required international collaboration to solve and that ended in actual Oregon woods with a real stone triangle. All of this was built for you, for the person who watches the show and thinks, there is more here. For the person who plays the recording backward, for the person who shines the black light on the page, for the person who looks up the coordinates encoded in a tweet and calls a phone number about a lost pig, for the person sitting here right now watching a very long video about a cartoon at whatever hour of the night in whatever part of the world, because the show made you feel like the world was stranger and deeper and more worth investigating than it usually appears. That is who Gravity Falls was for. That is who it will always have been for. And the fact that you are here, still thinking about it, still pulling at the threads, still asking the questions that the show planted in you, that is exactly what the show hoped for. It was designed to outlast itself. It was designed to keep generating questions after the credits rolled for the last time. It was designed so that a viewer in some future year, far from 2016, far from the summer the show described, in a world the show could not fully anticipate, would find it and feel the same thing that the first viewers felt. There is something here. I need to look closer. I need to go back. There is more. There is always more. The pine trees are dark outside the window. The fog is in the valley. The compass is spinning. Something is in the woods behind you, just out of sight. 3 letters back.